Ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to add this bit of post-production audio before the podcast starts to thank NXG as well as Matt for coming on and chatting with me. I think it was a hell of a lot of fun. It was very different for me. I got to kind of just lay back and actually ask questions. Some of them a bit silly, some of them kind of technical, and then let those guys answer it. And then hopefully this gives you, my audience, a different insight into things rather than just having my opinion for everything. It was also really cool, to be honest, just to be able to lay back and not have to think too much, to be really honest with you. So that was kind of cool. But we went into quite a few topics, predominantly focused on the Switch, which, if you've been a viewer of mine for a while, you'll know that recently I had an exclusive in the Nintendo Switch. And there's also yet another report that there's a new Switch incoming. So I think that a lot of this podcast certainly kind of fits in with that very well. Very apt timing. But with all of that said, let's get on with the podcast.
Sweet.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, well, you know who I am, so I won't really introduce myself. But I am joined by Matt, if you would like to give a few words.
Hi, my name is Matt Hargett. I'm a dad and an indie musician and a gamer and a programmer. And my mom was a gamer and programmer. She got me into both of those when I was a very early age. And I like all kinds of games and all kinds of game systems. And I'm really pleased to be here. I'm a big fan of Paul's channel and of our
poor man.
Of the Paul's channel and of the other guest as well. Big fan of both of your channels.
And, well, that brings us to you, Michael.
So I'm Michael. I run the NX Gamer channel. So I've been a developer programmer, not in the video game industry. I'm just going to stress, because everyone always gets that confused. I'm not like Matt, but I work in the commercial area. So I worked for a lot of businesses, banks, government projects, data centers, that kind of boring stuff. I've been around a long time, and I've moved into more of an architectural management role now, but I still get hands in on programming where possible, and obviously I keep my eye on the game in terms of what developments are going on, what operation systems and GPU work and all that kind of stuff on the side. So that keeps me busy and keeps my hand in the game, and I've always been a very keen advocate of video games, right back to Commodore 64s and Amigas, assembly language actually on the Amigas, where I started out really hardcore coding, as you would say. So yeah, that's me. Brief summary.
Okay. Well, today's topics will be mostly focused on Nintendo, because they've been kind of like the silent one, to be honest with you. You know they're there, but they're just kind of watching everyone else fight it out, and then they'll come in later on and be like, hey guys, look what we've got. So we're going to be kind of discussing what Nintendo will be bringing to the table for the next generation, possible stuff, and of course this is no privileged information. This is mostly guesswork based on public information, so please don't say Matt is like leaking a whole bunch of stuff. He's not. Yeah. This is seriously no privileged information. This is guessing, but we're going to get it all wrong, so you can all point and laugh at us in like 12 or 18 months, and that's what's going to make this great. So I think the most obvious thing to do is first to get kind of a sense of where Nintendo is right now. So obviously, essentially, they've got an underclocked Maxwell sock. And I think we can all agree that for what the Switch actually is, in terms of the raw specs, games like Doom and whatever else look incredible. So what do you guys think of the Switch in terms of like the overall like user experience and what it kind of brings?
Matt, you go first, sir.
Sure. Yeah, I think it's interesting to bring up Doom and other kind of cross-platform engines that have dynamic resolution scaling, because including Unreal, which I believe the Kirby game, that Kirby game used Unreal, or Yoshi's Woolly World, one of the two, where it's just like, okay, well, how low does resolution scaling? How far does resolution scaling get you, and how low does it go? Right, and I think that in the Digital Foundry analysis of some of those titles, like it would go down to like 320p or sub kind of 480p, but reasonably maintain the frame rate in a portable form factor. And I think that I don't know if they did optimization in-house or if they farmed it out to Iron Galaxy or one of those other kind of studios that, was expert at cramming stuff onto the Wii U and expert at cramming stuff onto the Switch, and really like squeezing performance out of those onions without having to reauthor a lot of content. So I think it's really interesting that that you can have a game that dynamically resolution scales down to 300p or 240p or whatever, but in a portable form factor, in the screen the size that it is and the distance that it is from your face, assuming you're not holding it right up to your face, the gameplay mechanics are what count. Is it a fun game to begin with? Is it an enthralling experience to begin with? And it is. Then I think there's a lot of tolerance for the resolution going up and down in the moment and kind of stuff like that. And if you can play for a long time, the battery life is good, and you're hooked into the mechanic of whatever it is, or the fun of whatever it is on that plane ride, on that car ride, that's that meta experience that I think matters more than individual pixel resolution or what lighting or shaders or blah 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 is actually going on. So I think Doom is a really good example of that, where it's like is the content and the mechanic compelling to begin with. In the case of Doom 2016, I think it's 2016 is when it came out. I think the answer is yes.
Yeah,
and it's like, does it lose? Yeah, does it lose too much by being 30 FPS instead of 60 FPS? And I don't have the sales numbers for that in front of me, so I don't know if it feels less frantic or whatever. But being able to take that on the go, on a plane ride, pre-pandemic plane ride, obviously, or whatever, is at a meta level a new experience, and I think that's an interesting thing to keep sight of. So I think that would be my kind of take on what Switch uniquely brings to the table, and even though it's a $400 console based on an underclocked sock that they couldn't give away in a NVIDIA tablet for $50 the holiday before. It's the same hardware off the shelf. But that's
Nintendo
okay.
magic for you.
100%. So, but that's not meant to like underplay the value of what they're bringing, which is here's a portable experience that is commodity hardware, so it is easier for developers to port stuff. And if those cross-platform titles have those engine features like dynamic resolution scaling or what have you, or scaling down the animated frames of NPCs further out the distance, all those kinds of things, that's great for publishers. They can get a longer tail out of some of that compelling content and those compelling worlds, like Doom. I think like something I don't think I've seen. I'm pretty sure it's not on there, but like Dishonored or Prey. Are fantastic worlds that it's the story that's compelling, it's the character building that's compelling. I don't know that it's so much in the Deus Ex, I think, is another great example. It's in that world building and that story building, that character building that's compelling, and being able to take that with you on the go and being able to experience that where maybe you can't do that at home because you only have one TV and your other siblings are watching it all the time or whatever. So I think that, I think that's the real compelling value proposition for the Switch, despite the kind of commodity hardware and the kind of price tiering of it being a little bit dubious.
What about you, Michael?
Well, I echo a lot of what Matt said, but I think it's Nintendo made Nintendo, isn't it? I mean, the last time Nintendo made anything that followed the mainstream, so to speak, was the GameCube, and then from then they've always been very done their own thing, and I think that's
Prime for life. Metroid Prime for life.
They've got their own USP, and I think Switch is kind of their perfection so far of the handheld that they push so well. I mean, I from the UK, and you remember this, Paul, you're from the UK, but the Game Boy was the first time Nintendo really took off in the UK.
It was just Sega, like 16-bit wars over here were basically Sega, and maybe that weird kid down the road had the Nintendo. it's weird.
Yeah, the Nintendo Entertainment System just wasn't big at all, and I mean the Master System really kind of set the tone for Sega, and because their arcade the impact they had in the arcade made them popular. But the Game Boy changed all that, and I think that it was the one handheld that my grandma, God bless her soul, it was my granddad, sorry, it was the first thing he ever played. He never knew it was a game, but he played Tetris, and he actually liked it because he understood it.
Yeah.
And I think that's where Nintendo have always been on that edge. They understand that it's not about dividing people or making something that's compelling or story driven or the most graphically intense. It's just something that's fun that you can pick up and play anywhere. And I think the Switch is the perfection of that. It kind of, you can play any kind of game on it, and they've removed the restrictions that have come with previous handhelds. The screen quality is excellent for handheld. It plugs into your TV dead simply via HDMI. And I think that they've kind of brought the marketplace so that a lot of companies and teams can literally survive. Small independents can survive on the Switch alone. And in sometimes, I've seen this on some of the sales, they get better revenue on the Switch than they do on the Xbox or PlayStation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think Nintendo have just really brought their own market to the forefront. And I think that's where they'll stay. I don't think they'll ever go back into the competition of the AAA titles again. I think they'll stay on the left of field. But I think the Switch is almost a perfect handheld for what it is. It's a handheld that also plugs into your TV. I know people say it was a console that's a handheld, but it's not.
Yeah, I think that's the best way to describe it. I also, and this is slightly off topic, one of the things I love, for example, about Nintendo is the genius of how their games are created. For example, the first Mario, essentially, as you're learning the game, you will learn how the game plays just by playing the first level. You must jump over the enemies, you must do this, you can jump on blocks. It's literally Shigeru Miyamoto, when he was designing the game, he designed each level to teach you how to play. Okay, enemy touching bad. It's that simple. And I think that brings us to one of the logical things, because obviously the Switch is great, but it's A, expensive, and B, I wouldn't exactly trust giving it to like a younger kid. So I think a very logical thing for us to start out with is, will the Switch get a cost-reduced, simpler model that is, for lack of a better word, kid-proof? It's hardier.
I think the Switch Lite does that, doesn't it? Like the controllers are attached; you can't remove them.
But would you say though it could be even further reduced in costs?
I mean, I don't know what their profit margin. I don't know what their margins are in their BOM, but and I don't know what kind of deal that they worked out with Nvidia, but it's fabbed. All the chips are fabbed at an old process, an old process.
It's 28 nm, isn't it?
It was 20 for the initial Switch, and I think it was 16 for the Lite and the Switch revision. If I recall correctly.
It's 20. Yes, 20. Yeah.
Yeah. So they were already like a kind of a node behind, which is fine for the clocks that it's at and kind of everything else. Could it be like even more durable? Like I have a new 3DS, but I don't have a Switch here at home. But I do remember hearing about the drift of the sticks and stuff like that. And so, and I don't know if the Lite already made things durable enough to be able to do that. But like, I don't know if they would do something like they've done with like some of the Kindles, for instance, where they're more and more waterproof and there's kind of a waterproof rating. That's something I think that would be logical for them to do, but I don't know what that does to their bill of material cost.
That's true.
And where they're comfortable. So I think one of the reasons why Nintendo kind of plays it safe in this way is because, with the GameCube, they did lose pretty big, and then the Wii was a hit, and then the Wii U they lost pretty big. So I think it's them being responsible to their shareholders and building up a good war chest so that they can try stuff within reason, but then if it doesn't work out, they can kind of like lay low for a few years and kind of rely on the war chest that they've built up. I think that if the Switch Lite wasn't already have some kind of IPX waterproof rating, that's something that if I as a parent would love to see, and not hardier so much, but lighter. So even the new 3DS, which is a little bit lighter than the Switch, my 5-year-old daughter, it's too heavy to hold up for any reasonable amount of time for her. So if something was like even lighter, that would be really fantastic. If there was like a waterproof and lighter version, if it was as light as a Kindle, or not, that's probably not possible, but like getting closer to that, she can hold that Kindle for a while, two-handed, and her arms don't get tired. But she can't do that with with a Switch or anything that's kind of that weight.
That's a very good point, actually, Matt, and that's something that is kind of an important area they don't concentrate enough on. I think that's one area the Switch did fall down on. It is very heavy. It's surprisingly heavy, in fact. And I think that my kids, when I got the Switch and was playing it, my lad got bored because of the fact that he couldn't sit and play it on the floor because it was just too heavy to hold up. So he went back to playing the Xbox. So it's actually, you've just realized that was one of the issues that he said at the time, was the fact that he just got bored of holding it. It got heavy and he started resting it on his knee, and then he couldn't see the screen as well. But it's easier the older you are. A teenager, it's not a problem. But if you're like 6 or 7, it's a pretty heavy object. So that's a very good point, actually.
I think Nintendo, obviously, they kind of had limitations simply because of the hardware at the time, but maybe with improved processors. I mean, do you think they could actually shrink down and maybe squeeze more out of it? Or do you think they would just wait and then just kind of go with new generation hardware?
I think the screen takes a lot of the weight. The screen and the battery are probably the biggest weight impact on the box itself, and it's not got an OLED, has it? And it's not got very expensive optics in terms of what's in the box itself. They're very good, but they're not where they've spent the money, and I think that's where they'd need to refine the design. But again, putting the business hat on, there wouldn't be a return for that. They would do all these kind of market research anyway, know where the impact would be. And if less than 20% of their market is interested in that and more interested in a better screen at 1080p with OLED, for example, as an example that they might use, then they do that way above ergonomics in terms of the weight. But they can save a little bit of options, or at least make it more ergonomically comfortable by balancing the weight out in the kit itself, very much like Sony did with the PSVR. That as a headset, that was an excellent piece of design, because anyone uses VR a lot, and I do, and I know other people do as well. That was one of the big benefits of the PSVR, is it didn't feel heavy on your head, whereas the Oculus, the first ones, felt like you're wearing a crash helmet, and as a pilot, that feels like. So I think that's where they could spend their time and money, and that would be much better time spent in their design department. Whether they will, I don't know. I lean more the fact that they wouldn't, but I would not know for sure.
I think pointing out the housing assembly for the screen versus an OLED. So with an LCD screen, it's not an emissive display, so there is a backlight. And do you have one backlight, or you have them distributed, or like what do you do? So it does make it thicker. It does add more complication there and more material there for the different like layers of it, and keeping them separated reasonably, so that if you press on it too hard, it doesn't, blah blah blah. And I think that on OLED being an emissive technology, you don't need a backlight. Yeah. It is emissive. It is its blacklight. So then it's a question of, well, what's the power consumption for the pixel density, for the like that, and then how much does it cost? And something I did research on last year or so was basically looking at OLED screens in smaller sizes, where you can have a whole sheet and you can cut out small pieces of it. And the smaller pieces you can cut out of it, if there's a quality control problem with one part of the sheet, you don't lose the whole sheet like you do with a 77-inch screen or an 80-inch screen or something like that. So depending on the screen size, that's one thing. But also, if you look at the power draw for, and it might have been an article from Tom's Hardware that did this analysis of the power draw across different Samsung mobile OLEDs. But like the power draw for the number of nits of brightness has gone down. So I'm not prepared to do like some napkin calculation here with you folks, but that is getting better and better and better and better. And as OLED is becoming more and more of a mainstream TV thing, the manufacturing is getting cheaper, the quality control, the kind of things that fail quality control become less and less and less, and all that stuff. And I think we have all of LG to thank for that, because LG kind of ended up going it alone with OLED, where some of the other manufacturers like Panasonic and the usual crowd kind of backed away from OLED during the Great Recession, the last global recession.
I was going to say which one.
The last one, yeah. And so I think that's interesting. I think that someone who's smarter than me should take a look at Well, if you take the current mobile OLEDs that are available on phones, what are their power draw at, say, 200 nits, not even 400, not even like HDR 400, kind of like compatibility or measurement, but just like a little something, something. So it does well in daylight, let's say, which is important for a mobile. And kind of how much does that assembly weigh versus how much does an LCD plus its backlight weigh? So like what's the power draw difference at a certain resolution, and what's the kind of weight difference? That would be really interesting to see. I think that's sometimes we don't come with answers, we come with questions. That's the question I would love for someone to deep dive in and answer, because if it turns out that it breaks even on weight and or power consumption, or it's potentially better even, then it's a matter of like, well, what other constraints are there? Supply chain constraints, like is it hard to get OLEDs, or the resins? Are some of the material science things? Oops, we lost him.
Yeah, he mentioned a minute ago he crashed. He's not having the most stable of connections today.
All right, I'll pick it up from the somewhere.
I'm not. Yeah. Well, hopefully he comes back in the next second.
Did he switch to a tablet, or was he still on his? Oh, he said he was on a PC, but he might switch to a tablet.
Yeah, I think that's what he said.
Sounds like we should start a GoFundMe, and so we can get a new laptop. Or maybe it's the heat.
Yeah, it might be. The thing about the
Yeah.
UK, as you know, is like air conditioning is not a thing, and so
Yeah,
our houses are literally designed to keep heat in.
Yeah, it's the same thing in San Francisco.
Oh, really?
Yeah, these Victorian
there you
houses,
go.
a lot of them don't have insulation. Almost no one has air conditioning. Partially because the ceilings and the floor, the space between them is so thin, there's nowhere to put the ducts, basically. So you have to like lower your ceilings to do it. Anyway.
Are you back, Michael?
I am sorry, I had a power cut then.
Oh, wow.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, it happens. It's just I live near a cut-off center on the grid, so the storms obviously affected. It happened before. It's actually happened 3 times in this pandemic stuff. So I don't know what's going on with that. So apologies.
Oh, gosh. I was hypothesizing it was the heat in your laptop shut down for cooling reasons.
No. I've got another PC, so I've got a separate generator here. So I'm on that for now, just in case it goes off again. But it'll last about 3 hours, so I'll leave it on that for a bit. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
No worries.
As long as the zombies haven't gotten you, that's the important thing.
No, I'm safe. I'm safe from the apocalypse just now. Not the Walking Dead yet.
Okay.
So I think there's a good edit point somewhere, Paul.
Yeah, we'll figure that out.
The like I'd love for someone to do that calculation.
Yeah.
Piece. Michael, did you have a response to that unpacking of your LCD
OLED
backlighting?
versus LCD stuff, yeah.
Yeah, what I was saying was basically like the power draw for OLEDs at the same level of nits has gone down and down and down and down and down. The manufacturing has gotten more cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. So from a power draw perspective, it might be break even with an LCD plus backlight, because OLED doesn't light pixels that don't need to be lit, unlike a black backlight which lights the whole shebang, right? The whole thing. And so then it's a matter of, there's a durability thing. Does OLED break more? Is it more sensitive to whatever? And I have 2 OLED Vitas and never had a problem with either of the displays, even after dropping both of them on multiple occasions. So it seems durable to me.
Does it have any screen protection on it? I've never used a Vita, to be really honest with you.
Yeah, I don't know what the material is, but it's on top of the screen, but it is a Gorilla Glass-ish thing that is scratch-proof, and then the screen is like smack right up against that.
Okay, so it's pretty hardy material that's protecting it. Okay.
Seemingly so. I mean, yeah. I mean, you give it like a Ginsu knife and a kid, like you probably wouldn't survive that. But like, I think you've got bigger problems.
You've never met my kid. My kid doesn't need a Ginsu kniff. He'll do it with his bare hands.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we're at a point now with OLED production costs and just supply chain costs and other kind of operational stuff like that, where is it could it be lighter because there's no backlight? The assembly gets simpler, so the device can be potentially thinner, that kind of stuff. What is that crazy talk, Michael? What do you think?
I don't think it is at all. Economies of scale are always around. That's why everything becomes cheaper, such as flash memory in terms of DDR RAM. It's why one of the things why SSD was. That's why I kind of knew it. I mean, 2 years ago, I was saying about what the consoles would have, and I said NVMe was the choice, and that's exactly why. What you've just said is because the more it gets used, the cheaper it becomes. And I think OLED's reached that saturation point now where more people are getting into it, and it has the benefits outweigh the negatives now, and more manufacturers are making more screens. Therefore, they're cheaper to, as you say, they've got less. They need less tolerance on fault tolerance in terms of their yield, so you can cut pieces out of the screen, reuse it. You don't get the waste you get, and then it will reach the point where no one will make them. Therefore, like CRTs, they just become a dead practice. No one uses them anymore. So I think OLED certainly, yeah. So OLED's certainly something I think they'll go with. I think if it's not on their agenda, they're certainly looking at it because it makes sense. And I think that combined with a cheaper, smaller node in terms of their fabrication process, going to maybe not 7 nanometer, but certainly lower. That will again
something like that.
Yeah.
Or 12 is more likely actually with TSMC.
Yeah, and then you get on the back of companies already making and using those, and you're not going back to an old antiquated fabrication process which people don't use anymore. That's I think
kind
where
of what I
they're
was saying earlier as well. Like on a smaller process, they're saving power, so they might be able to squeeze in a smaller battery.
Yes.
But would you say that with the Switch, we'll get into the specs in a moment of like a more upgraded Switch, but since we're on the screen, I don't want to jump back to the screen in like 30 minutes. But do you think there's a possibility with a more powerful Switch with finite specs in a moment that they would either go for a more responsive screen or even more impressive, like 120 hertz or something like that, as we're seeing cell phones do that for like Fortnite, for example? He says, shuddering. So I don't know which one of you wants to take it first.
Again, I think
Michael's talking first, so go, Michael.
Thanks, Matt. I don't think they would. No, I don't think they would go for 120 FPS. I don't think that's a target audience for Nintendo overall. And it would also mean that they'd have to ramp up the specs of the machine to put that kind of throughput through regularly in a game. Fortnite, fine, but maybe some other games, but I think it would be high refresh rates on a device that they're aiming for. It's not really for a phone. It's different, and even the phones that use it are kind of more gaming phones in quotes. So I wouldn't suspect they would. I think they'd go for clarity of image and response rate on, for less ghosting and that kind of area, which OLEDs are good at anyway.
Definitely.
So I think that's where their effort would be better spent. I don't know, but with Nintendo, you've always got to keep in your mind never to follow what everyone else does for the bleeding edge, because they're never going to be there again, in my opinion. Nintendo will never enter the bleeding edge. So I remember when the Switch came out, and everyone was thinking it would just be around the Xbox One or the PS4 levels, and I was just, there's no way they're going to be anywhere near that, and they weren't. And I think, again, if we get to anywhere near that level now, Xbox One, PS4 for the Pro, I still think that's they've done well if they get to that level. I don't think that's what Nintendo are about, and I think 120 FPS screens, don't see them doing it. I'd like to be wrong.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think there's anything in their interaction paradigm and their UI, like the animations for transitions across the store and stuff like that, where 120 FPS would be like a holy shit kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But like, even on the iPhone and or some of those other mobile phones that have 120 FPS screens, the system UI runs unlocked. But if you actually get like, a 900 FPS camera and like really analyze it, it's not actually 120 FPS. It's just unlocked, which after a point for like a UI interaction, you can't really, it feels smoother. And 120 FPS is one of those things where you can't describe, it's like HDR, or per pixel HDR with like OLED displays. You can't really describe it to people. They have to see it to have that it's like kind of like VR in that way also, where until your brain is like kind of being tricked in a new way, and you're just like, holy shit, what just happened? And it can be as simple as you swipe and it's a 120 FPS transition which gives them more. They could do not even fancier stuff, but more subtle things that you can then see just because of the extra frame rate. But what I would think about is like the Oculus Quest. It doesn't have a 120 hertz panel either. It has a 72 hertz or a 75 hertz panel. I can't remember which. And so I think that there's a lot of wiggle room for commodity displays between 60 and 120 FPS.
Yes.
Now, would they go for that for some reason? Let's take Doom as an example. So for Doom, in the portable case, in like the portable instance, would you want it to run at go above 60 to go to 72 with a dynamic frame rate at 72 from 60 to 72? Or would you want to have more resolution? Ideally, you would want both, obviously. You would go like, hey, well, I want it to be 72 hertz and to be, 720p native. But if you had to choose, which one would you choose?
Personally, I would go
yeah.
with the resolution.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's very... I know there's probably going to be PC gamers out there that are literally biting their teeth. But personally, I'd go with the resolution because I think on a portable form factor, the higher frame rate wouldn't bother me.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a preference there. Obviously, one thing I think about is portable handheld form factors. It's such an intimate device. If you're sick in bed, you're kind of holding it close to you, like you would hold your teddy bear if you were growing up in like the Victorian era or something. But it is close to your face, and so in those kinds of, I'm gonna say intimate, but don't take that anywhere it doesn't need to go. But you understand what I mean. Yeah, you understand what I mean. Like even in a non-VR, like Labo VR situation. So that's what I would think about. Is if in those situations where it is closer to your face. So on a plane, you pre-pandemic plane, you put your food tray down in front of you, you put the switch on it, you undock the two controllers, and you can play inside a distance. So does frame rate help you there more, or resolution? And this is one of those things also that I think it should be. I'd say it's a title by title basis, and it's up to the creator of what they're trying to do and how they're trying to do it versus a platform mandate. I think platform mandates like that can get you in trouble. If you say you must run at 4K locked resolution, it's like, okay, well, we drop down into the teens for frame rate. Is that okay? Yep. Okay. And that's I don't think that usually plays out very well
No.
when you take that latitude away from the creators to deliver the experience that they want to deliver. So I think that there's wiggle room between 60 and 120. It's not a binary switch. I think no pun intended. But I think also for the Quest, it's panel 72 or 75 hertz or something like that. There's wiggle room in between there. And for OLED displays, you can dial that in even more, even finer, I think. It depends on the underlying, it's not the panel, it's the underlying controller and stuff like that. So I think that there's wiggle room there. I don't know what the right answer is there. If you would do have more consistent resolution for games, like they're 720p locked more of the time when there's not a bunch of alpha on screen or explosions or like whatever else, or if you would kind of want more frame rate. Something I remember from like OG Xbox like a long time ago is like when there's a lot of explosions on screen, so there's a lot of alpha effects, the frame rate would kind of dip on some, I forget what the game was, but I was like, it seems like that's kind of realistic, right? You know what I mean? Because like the frame rate drops right when there's a big explosion, when like all of you have sensory overload basically if you're actually in the explosion. So I think that from a supply chain perspective and a technology perspective, there's a spectrum there between 60 and 120. But I would also say that just having 60 without crazy amounts of ghosting, I think most creators would take that over like, let's do 72 hertz, but with the same amount of ghosting. I think the persistence is the problem that I would guess more creators would want to be solved sooner rather than later, because it makes every game look smeary, even if you don't have a painterly art style that you're going for. It kind of can mess up the art style and the intention of the creator.
Because the Switch as well, one of the problems with it is it's memory bandwidth constrained as well as CPU, right?
Yeah, and so and I think that Richard Ledbetter from Digital Foundry did analysis where they kind of overclocked the CPU and the GPU with different titles to see what made a difference. And if I recall correctly, it was all the CPU. It was the CPU clock for most games is where the bottleneck was.
Modern Vintage Gamer did similar as well. He did very similar testing, and he found that the GPU, I can't remember which Zelda it was. I can't remember what the Zelda's called, but he overclocked the GPU, and the difference was like bupkis, you know, just like nothing. Overclocking the CPU helped, but because obviously you can't overclock the RAM, there's always that bottleneck as well. Obviously the CPU does help, but if you can't supply data to the system, what difference does it make? So I think Nintendo could get quite a lot of mileage out of just increasing bandwidth and cranking the CPU cores for an increased Switch performance.
Potentially, yeah. So, one thing I would throw in there is cache. And so by clocking the CPU higher, the on-chip caches are also clocked higher and are more responsive.
True.
And so depending on what the latency of those caches are and what the size of them are, that from a Oliver bill of materials cost perspective, that could be cheaper than faster RAM, which emits more heat, pulls more power potentially than a cache does. Because ideally, you don't have to go all the way out to memory, wait for the CAS to come back around, and then fetch, and then go back all the way, right? And I feel like, Nintendo's kind of modus operandi with the Wii and the Wii U was you've got a fixed set of hardware, optimize everything, line up those data structures so that the cache always has hot data in it and whatever else. And that's where some of those third-party studios that kind of get called in as a tiger team to like optimize something for Switch or for lower-end platforms, that's where their expertise is going, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to reorder these fields and these structs so that it lines up better this way. We're going to make this data structure. We're going to shave off some bits here and here and here so it aligns better to the page boundary, blah, blah, blah. And I think that that's another way to come at that same problem. But because the caches, the more hits that you get, that has significantly less latency than going out all the way out to the memory bus. And I would posit that obviously you can have your memory fabbed at a kind of a better node as well, and that brings down the heat and the power consumption there as well. Ideally, you would do both. But I think one of the things that I saw in a kind of architecture diagram of the Switch's SoC, of the Maxwell SoC, was that CPU has kind of regular caches, has an instruction cache, has a data cache, has an L1, has an L2, etc. I don't know that the GPU has any kind of reasonable caching structure. Not honestly reasonable, has a kind of a more typical modern caching structure.
Well, like a large L2 or something like that.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably why it hits. I think that I posit that is why if you scale that up clockwise, it doesn't help as much because it doesn't have an L2 cache, so it has a tiny L1 cache. And yes, it speeds up when you speed up the clock, but because it's so small, it has to go out to memory, and the memory is not scaling. They're not overclocking the memory as well in these tests from Digital Foundry and Modern Vintage Gamer and in the jailbreaking community. So I feel like the GPU hits that bottleneck faster than the CPU does, where the CPU's got it's multiple cores with a big little configuration, but it's got a reasonable amount of, I'll say reasonable as if I'm the arbiter of all judgment there.
Yes, you are.
But
we're making a YouTube video. We are the arbiter of all truth. That's how this works.
But it's not like 4K of L1 instruction cache, or
No.
it's like 32K or 64K or something like that. And that's something where there's like, yes, you need to optimize for it potentially for if you're porting something like Doom 2016. But if you're porting something like, say, LA Noire, which ran on PS3 and Xbox 360, sure, you still have to optimize it, but it's not, oh my God, what are we going to do? We have to fundamentally change all of our data structures to get it to be hot, to get them to be in the cache and stay hot. So memory bandwidth is a piece of it, but I'd say that cache is another piece of it. And depending, one of them could be cheaper / lighter, or in terms of literal weight in the device. Those are all factors that could make the ergonomics better in terms of making it lighter while resolving the some of the typical bottlenecks. But what this does kind of touch on is that GPU doesn't scale for clock. That does seem to be hitting memory bandwidth seemingly, or it doesn't have enough cores, or basically it has such a low number of cores and stream processors that are the equivalent there of an NVIDIA anyway, that clocking it doesn't matter just because that's not the way that architecture scales. That could also be a possibility.
You know what,
Michael, do you have a...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to throw something in, but go ahead, Michael.
Sure, go.
It wasn't me. I wasn't speaking. It was Matt.
Oh no, I was gonna toss it over to you and just what do you think? Do you think like cache would help more, or memory bandwidth would help more, or do you know anything about the Maxwell GPU architecture, like where it's just like the clocks, where it needs more cores, not more clocks to be able to scale in the first place?
I think you hit that on the head. I mean, caches, registers, they don't get enough credit in terms of how important they are to everything that happens in a computer. The latency times, the round trip from memory back to caches, back to CPUs to work on, or GPUs to work on the data. You're absolutely right. And that's why increasing clock speeds makes that much of a performance for the CPU. But another thing that I think it struggles with in terms of its CPU is the fact that it is a big little design, but I think it only uses the 4 cores. It doesn't have the little design in action, does it? It doesn't use it at all. It's only a 4-core
I think you're right. I think it is only the 4, but I might be wrong.
Oh, interesting. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. That's interesting.
And it's only I covered it originally. And I remember reading, thinking I was surprised myself why it was there, but it must be some kind of redundancy issue while they're in the chip, but they don't use them. But it also, that means that branch prediction is nowhere near as good as modern x86 stuff. And you'll know this, Matt, but it's literally hundreds of years of research, man hours into branch prediction, what it is now and how good it is in understanding where data needs to be and getting it in the cache at the right time. And I think that's why the switch benefits so much from being upclocked on the CPU, not the GPU, because the CPU is still limiting most of what it does 90% of the time, in my opinion, and then bandwidth comes into it for the GPU side. I don't think the Maxwell architecture is inherently bad, and I think it benefits them in terms of porting the code over because it's compliant with DirectX 11. They can port PS3, Xbox 360, and Xbox One stuff over to it relatively simply in terms of the instruction set. It's about the CPU. That's quite a seismic change for a lot of the game code they're running, and I think you're absolutely right. I can't really add any more technical expertise that you have. It's the cache and the instruction process in the CPU is the Switch's biggest bottleneck in modern games.
Does the Switch OS run on the little cores?
That's just what I was going to ask. That I was literally just about to ask that same question.
You know what? I don't honestly know, but I should know because I remember covering it when it came out. I did a review on it, and I'll have to go back to my own notes. I don't remember. I know that the games don't use it; they only use the 4. But you could be absolutely right, Matt. I'll have to check.
That would make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, if the OS uses a little, that would make more sense. It's kind of like how the PS4 or whatever have like allocated CPU cores just for the OS. You would kind of think the Switch would, because if they've got like 3 cores for the game, 3 of the big cores, and the OS is running on the 1 remaining big core, that would be kind of bad. You would expect it would be the littles.
Even in an SMT situation, a simultaneous multi-threading situation, like on modern x86, for instance, like spreading out OS threads across across the SMT across the physical cores, you're kind of messing up the caches there basically by giving it a completely unrelated workload and stuff like that. So it would make sense to me if they were kind of separated, because then you could do memory bandwidth kind of control for that core, so that even if it was running full blast for some reason, it still couldn't take an inordinate amount of memory bandwidth away from the cores that are running the games, so that whatever the thing is doing, it never gets in the way of the games, even if someone makes a mistake in the OS or in the apps.
Yeah, and oh, sorry, go, Paul. Sorry.
I was going to say, this does bring one question though. If they went with a more modern GPU architecture, let's say the most obvious example would be something like Volta, or one of the further down the line SoCs from NVIDIA. Because let's face it, NVIDIA still will be providing a Switch Pro or whatever SoC. Would just the act of A, having more cache on the chip, B, having, you would assume, better data compression, better color compression and stuff like that, and C, having access to, this is a theory, but something like DLSS, because if you're rendering the game lower internally and then upsampling it, wouldn't that fix as well a lot of the bandwidth issues?
Would, but it all depends on how they set the machine up to be. It's all about ease of use, isn't it? So DLSS is a great piece of technology at the moment in terms of software solutions, and it's kind of where everyone's going anyways. It was seen at the beginning of this generation about working smarter, not harder, and using the pixels more appropriately. And I think DLSS, checkerboard rendering, temporal resolution scaling, all of those kind of elements have all been the solution to a problem that's just gotten bigger. And I think this generation, the 4K demands, is you've really got to understand how big of that demand is, because I don't think any generation has had that kind of leap. And on top of that,
4 times the pixels over 1080p. It's not cheap to run that.
And you think you come from something like the PlayStation 1 or the Sega Saturn, and you went to the PS3, it was nowhere near that level of improvement. Dreamcast was 480p. So you had a relatively small jump to Xbox and PS3 at 720, and now just one generation later, technically, the Pro models, we've gone from 720p to 4K. It's just it's a crazy amount of leap, and I think that's where DLSS comes into it. But would NVIDIA sell their hot ticket into the next Switch? Possibly, if it's 2 years away from coming out, but it needs bigger adoption in terms of engines, and I think the solutions and the games that have used it, such as Control, are excellent, but I'm not sure that the model's there just yet, that it works as seamlessly as that it's sold to us to work. I'm not saying it doesn't. I'm not saying I don't know for definite, but I think there's more research and more implementation across engines. These kind of things only work when multiple teams are all branching off into the same research area to improve the technology and improve the software that actually delivers the games. I think that's where DLSS will work out. I think there would be much better spent using their GPU budget, just getting the best they can. But in all likelihood, it's going to be the X2. I can't see the Switch going. If they bought the Maxwell which was old back when the Switch came out, then why would they go to top end Volta now? They might do, but there'd have to be a very good reason, I think, commercially to do that. And I think that's their GPU does enough now at the moment to stay in the game. Biggest difference in the next generation is probably not going to be the GPU, because resolutions are kind of culling down what they can do with that amount of GPU power. But storage, speed, accessible memory, registers, caches, exactly as Matt said, that's where they need to spend their budget, because that's what's going to impact them more when they're porting games from next generation to the next Switch. So LSS will help, but it all depends on how game designs are moving forward in the next few years. And GPU throughput might not be the biggest issue.
Yeah, I think that totally agree on the working smarter, not harder kind of a thing. Like, you can brute force your way past these things, but ecologically, just with our environmental hats on, pulling 800 watts of power just so you didn't have to do sub-pixel culling.
So I can't hear you over my PC Glorious Master Race hat.
Well, but even for PCs, like for me personally, it's kind of like there's like I always go like, well, I don't want to get personally just environmental impact, that kind of stuff. And not everybody thinks this way, and no judgment on people who don't.
Well, also, it's like you're just boiling to death in the room.
Right, sure, right. Especially now.
Hearing the fans go,
Yeah.
Like
Yeah,
old
yeah.
Fermi fans from the 480.
Just close your
or
eyes and
something
pretend it's a sauna.
Yeah, exactly.
Just don't pour any water on your PC expecting to get steam out of it.
Water cooling.
But
Steam?
But-
Is that a reference to Valve?
Yeah. Just remember,
Oh, that's
you could,
funny.
You could just plumb the GPU into your like central heating. You're good.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So I think that so the bump in resolution is one thing, but I think the other really big challenge, which I don't think is as much of a challenge with the kind of games that come to Switch, and please challenge me on that, is the de facto thing that the de facto thing for other platforms I feel is that AAA game means open world, and it
Yeah,
means long draw
definitely true.
distances. And if you have 4K resolution, and you
Open
don't
World
have
is on Switch, but it was terrible.
like Breath of the Wild is open
Yeah.
world and whatever else, and you can definitely as a designer put like, well, we're going to put a hill here because the LOD pop-in is too bad, or there's ways you can design it, and it ends up affecting the terrain of your world, and as a result ends up kind of affecting the storytelling you can do, right? If it's like, well, this was the flatlands, like, no, it can't be the flatlands because we got to put a thing here so that the level can load or whatever.
Bring back N64 fog, TM.
Right, exactly, like from Blood, or not even N64.
Oh,
just like a little
Turok.
piece.
Turok.
yeah.
is
Sure,
amazing.
yeah.
Sorry, I digress. Sorry, Matt.
No worries. Ultima Underworld, a whole bunch of them. Yeah, comes to mind.
Did you ever play Exhumed or Power Slave? You guys would have called it on the
Power Slave? Yeah,
on
sure.
the Sega
Okay.
Saturn. Did you ever play
I played
the
it at a
Saturn
friend's
version?
house a long time ago. Yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
god, that game was. Lobotomy did not get enough credit for that. Sorry, I'm going way on a tangent.
No worries. So 4K and that bump in resolution comes with other things that are almost a must, and that includes, sub-pixel culling, where it's like, hey, it takes up a pixel or less, then don't render that triangle, like it's not taking up enough screen space, and if you don't have ray tracing, so you don't have to worry about like, oh well, is a second light bounce going to go off of that polygon? If it does, we kind of need to keep it. If ray tracing doesn't come into it, that's a simpler conversation. But and then it's a matter of, okay, you're going to have culling. Is it programmable, or is it fixed function? Right? Is it just straight up subpixel culling and whatever else, or is it more of a programmable thing so that if a given game needs that for some reason? Now with DLSS, I would think subpixel stuff just gets excised or gets in the way anyways, or as noise. So the more of that you can remove, the better. So if you're going to have tensor cores and that silicon, you probably would want something integrated into those geometry engines, or not, I mean literally like trademark geometry engine, but I mean but that underlying, like really integrated into the hardware, so that stuff gets culled very early by the hardware at a very early stage. When you do that, you are alleviating memory bandwidth, you're alleviating GPU compute, you're doing a whole bunch of stuff, even before, never mind 4K, right? But it depends, it'll have a different effect depending on the game, the draw distances, the other kind of visual aspects, and the other kinds of like game mechanics and stuff like that.
See, I see the Switch at like 1080p, even a Pro, to be honest.
Well, I think that, I hate to keep talking about Digital Foundry, but they do a lot of great work in this area. So Alex from Digital Foundry did a thing where it's like, if you take a rendering down to 540p and upscale that to 1440p, what do you get? And what does that look like? And they have also done a bunch of comparisons of like, here's what Detroit Become Human looks like with checkerboarding on PS4 Pro, and here's what it looks like on PC with DLSS. So I think that if Nintendo wanted to be able to say we support 4K resolution, and they wanted to do that in a way that scaled with their legacy titles that are only a few years old, but titles that they don't want to patch everything, that would be a way to do it. And I think that also with the OG Xbox backward compatibility on the Xbox One X, where they kind of per game do custom HDR tone mapping without having to recompile the game, that could be really compelling if they felt like they wanted to compete in that area. And of course, you would only do those things while the thing was docked.
I was going to say, that's probably a docked thing, so you can power those additional tensor cores.
Yeah, so, you mentioned better color compression, better geometry compression, all that stuff saves memory bandwidth also. So by adding more silicon into the mix, silicon that's potentially only really fully active when you're docked, you could probably operate at the same power consumption. If you brought a shrink into it as well, some kind of node shrink, from it's at 16 now, if you took it down to 12 or 10 or whatever, or 8. And obviously TSMC's 8 is different than blah, blah, blah. We don't need to, but basically lower than 20, which is old when it came out because they were using a ready supply of stuff that NVIDIA couldn't sell. So I think that, it's like, do you add memory bandwidth to this thing, or do you make it work smarter with a similar level of memory bandwidth that it already has? Or do you do both? And I think that they could do it whichever way, however they want to position the product. If they want to position the product as this can do 4K and it can do HDR, right? So their media block gets upgraded. They can then stream 4K Netflix on it, and et cetera, if they wanted to. Assuming they can make the deals with those content providers and stuff like that. They could, upscale your old stuff with DLSS and with, custom HDR tone mapping. They would look better, and with the DLSS, because it's on tensor cores and it's not fixed function, you could have a different DLSS profile per game that a creator can go like, give me DLSS profile number 8, because that's the one I want to use, right? And without recompiling your game, just adding metadata to the launcher for the launcher, right? That seems like a slam dunk to me potentially. But it would also allow then, if you had a Switch Pro, a new game, say a 2D game, like a Pixel Junk Eden 2, or which is, Picky saw that game at a friend's house, came home and said, I saw this game, I don't know what system it's on, but I have to have it. So Pixel Junk Eden, I mentioned because it was 1080p at 60 frames per second with full color range RGB over HDMI. So at the time, it was I've never seen anything like this 1080p 60 with that color gamut, right? And it wasn't HDR. It was these CMYK kind of bold colors. So I think that, another example would be the twin stick shooter that was an Xbox Live Arcade. That's very. Geometry Wars is another great example, and I've used this example in talking about 120 FPS games. Like those are games where making them HDR and making them high frame rate or high resolution, their natural art style lends itself. Gravity Crash is a game that was on PS3 and Vita, as well as another one that kind of had that Vectrex style of glow. Tempest 3000 and 4000 would be other ones, other examples where at those frame rates and at those color profiles and brightness profiles, something magical happens. And there's other art styles that lend themselves to that as well, but you can have a really fun game mechanic that is more arcadey or harkens to an earlier time, but those mechanics don't get old, right? And you don't need a new lick of paint. They can just lean into their art style a little bit more. So, but in terms of operational cost, like what's the BOM cost? Is it an X2? Is it Pascal based? How well do these things scale? Can you plug a different media block, like a newer media block, into those things to get HEVC decoding? Those are things that really depend on how they want to operate as a business. But I think technologically it's like right there, between geometry compression, color compression, variable rate shading, subpixel culling, whatever. You could keep, once you had 4K, you would have to actually, like 4K, like native frame buffer, you'd have to like really blow it up. You have to increase the memory bandwidth just to deal with the frame buffer and the pixel pushing. But there's ways that you could use that even existing memory bandwidth in a smarter way with more silicon. More silicon draws more power. Potentially, we could do a hand wavy thing and say, okay, we're going to add that silicon for VRS, subpixel culling, et cetera, but the die shrink will make it a wash, right? So it's the same power draw.
Hey,
I
Intel
thought
are
we were
doing
going to
it for
keep it
years.
positive. We're going to keep it positive. I don't. Fair
They
enough.
have. They've got
I
how
don't
many
want the
pluses do you want
pitchforks and
from
burning
them?
crosses on my lawn from the Intel people. Like I think that technologically it's there, and it's just a matter of, does NVIDIA have an off-the-shelf thing that would allow them to do that, right? So the other way to come at this is it's not 4K capable. It's just that they want to add subpixel culling, VRS, and other stuff at a lower node, because for the games they already have and the games that are coming in the future, they want to get more battery life with a smaller battery to make it lighter. And I would bet you $1 that if you are somehow able to Frankenstein bolt some of those features into a Maxwell compatible architecture, the silicon's going to be lighter than whatever the battery, than adding more battery or having the same amount of battery is. I don't have the hard numbers on that, but I would bet a good dollar or peso or drachma or rupee or whatever denomination, one single denomination rupee. All right, that you would want. That
rupee.
Silicon weight-wise is the
yeah.
cheaper way to do that, and is the, I don't want to say future-proof, but once you have those silicon features and you can, target kind of two similar but different profiles on that stuff, like, hey, on the Switch Pro or whatever, the Switch Lite 2 or the Switch Electric Boogaloo, whatever they want to call it, like you will see higher dynamic resolutions just because of VRS and or subpixel culling and or other kinds of stuff that are bolted in there, where it's just able to not do unique things that will scale better to TV necessarily. Actually, that will scale better to TV necessarily, but would give you potentially better battery life or the same battery life with a smaller battery. So I think that's a really cool way to think about it, because you could go either way or both ways. You could have a smaller battery, and when you're docked, turn that stuff on so that you can crank up resolution or frame rate or whatever it is. It could kind of give you both things. The question then I think then becomes, does NVIDIA have a Maxwell compatible SoC so they don't have to recompile a bunch of games that
Wouldn't technically Volta
instructions that wouldn't be the same, so that would limit, wouldn't it? It's all, and that's again the benefits of drivers, isn't it? People forget what driver work does on graphics cards. So you would need a recompile.
True.
The CPU would probably change as well, so that's another issue.
Oh yeah, actually, I'm reading about it now. The CPU is actually 2 Denver cores plus an A57. Previously, they had an A53 and an A57. I've just pulled up the
What for the
specs.
was that Tegra?
So with Volta,
okay.
that's with Pascal. With Volta, they've got 8 NVIDIA Carmel cores, and then with Orin, which is Ampere, they've got 12 ARM Cortex A78 Hercules. Although they have no other specs for the Ampere version, because obviously Orin is not launched yet, to my knowledge. Yeah, it's Ampere. That's Ampere.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. Like, does NVIDIA have something on like off the shelf that would let them do that? That would let them do that, or it's semi-custom, but basically it's all proven out and shipping, and it's either shipping in something else or enough of the pieces are shipping in something else that it's kind of a low risk thing for Nintendo to do. Because I have to think Nintendo's economists or whoever, consultants or whoever they have internally tell them, hey, there's a global recession coming up, so maybe try to so that would either make them delay shipping something or ship something faster potentially, so that they get enough penetration in the market before the kind of global consumer buying power goes down like significantly.
I wonder if they would have some type of method if you're running like old games. It's like, for example, how the Xbox does backwards compatibility, or PS4, where it basically puts it in backwards compatibility mode. And then that would be how it communicates with the older hardware, or essentially emulates the older hardware. I don't know if that would be possible, though.
I mean, for A57 versus A53,
this.
I would have to think that most of that is additive. Unless, Michael, do you know, like, did they remove, like, thumb instructions or anything between A53 and A57?
I've absolutely no idea. I'm not an ARM. I don't know what the changes are. I'd have to look it up. To be fair, I have no idea.
No worries, no worries.
Just to be clear, the A57 in Denver is Pascal, and the Caramel is the Volta one. So unless they're going to go custom and put in the tensor cores in, for example, a Pascal, which is possible. Let's face it, they could do basically anything if they go custom. You know, they could put it in a bowl of custard if they really wanted. But the NVIDIA, if they go off the shelf completely, it would be 8 NVIDIA Caramel cores. And this would be, but the instruction set is ARM v8.2, and the Maxwell instruction set is ARM v8 A. So I don't know what the
it's probably additive. They've just added more instructions to the original instruction set, so that would be easier for them to compile. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think
go ahead.
So I would. No, I was just going to say, theoretically, I think if there were issues, they would basically run it in some type of backwards compatibility mode. But I don't know enough about the Switch architecture to say if that's
historically
possible.
There's
So
real fun stuff where, you know, like a newer CPU that's a superset of instructions versus the previous generation. Sometimes, you know, really highly optimized hardware you can trip up latent bugs in it that weren't really bugs because it was built for older hardware. But like if you reduce like the number of cycles certain complex instructions take, older software that was sort of implicitly depending on it being a little more latent, you can start to hit like little weird problems, little hitches, even though it's faster hypothetically because certain things aren't lining up the way that they used to. I think that's less common these days because even on a kind of a dedicated hardware system, the complexity of these instruction pipelines, there's kind of enough stochasticity there in what's going on that code is usually it's usually more resilient by nature. I think it's when you get to the GPU side that things can get and that is where people do really kind of line up their Tetris blocks in terms of how they squeeze as much performance out of it as possible in a way that could be more sensitive to things like certain GPU ops being 2 cycles instead of 5 or whatever. And you might go like, hey, it's faster. That's got to be great. Yeah. But that may have a domino effect where it's like, okay, well, it can deliver that faster, but then it's moving the bottleneck elsewhere in the engine as a result. And that bottleneck elsewhere in the engine, you know, if it's not lock free or whatever underlying technical reasons, for whatever other technical reasons, you can have ripple effects where all of a sudden a game, even though things technically faster or certain GPU ops are lower latency, that a game can start to have new kinds of problems. Like if something was exactly timed to be at the V blank here and then not on the next V blank and do it every other V blank, and then that cadence is offset some, you can have interesting problems that you then have to solve at effectively a hardware level. You can do dynamic code insertion and do dynamic code translation on the fly.
Stall and wait or cycle time and repeat. Yeah, so emulation things like that.
Yeah, you could do that, but you know that's I don't want to go into that anymore. I'm going to stop that right there, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
But that's the kind of stuff that you would probably, so you could do it at a software level. However, you would probably do it at a hardware level and say, hey, add extra cycles for these things. And in terms of silicon cost and complexity, would it be custom at that point? Probably, unless that off-the-shelf part already had a compatibility mode for other reasons. But somehow I would take that same
I'm not
rupee I
sure
bet
whether
earlier
they
and
do.
bet it that is not the case. That for an off-the-shelf kind of embedded SoC from NVIDIA, that there's a switch they have in there to flip to make it cycle compatible with a previous generation, because autonomous cars don't care about that. The typical use cases they have don't care about that. So I think that if something like that was to happen, it would end up being semi-custom. So what that means for this conversation is that the GPU would have to they might also do a bunch of compatibility tests and go like, hey, it's fine, or well, maybe there's a little bit of glitching over here, but we don't care. Like they could also do that and go like, it doesn't have to be cycle compatible. They could just manual QA their way to being comfortable with that, and they'd have to go through that manual QA anyways as part of SOC bring up for any new hardware that they do. So why not? So the operational cost there is having to do it twice. You do it once on the potentially newer thing that might introduce some timing stuff, and go like, hey, if we get to the end and there's no problems, then we can use the new thing. And I think the real question there then is NVIDIA's CEO and board willing to play ball with Nintendo for a price that Nintendo is willing to pay? And I think that's probably where, after all these technical things of you could do this, you could do that, I think that's probably where the rubber actually meets the road for this stuff. Is what does NVIDIA want to charge, and what does a Nintendo want to pay?
Well, NVIDIA would want to, remember, the more you buy, the more you save, and Nintendo wants to buy as little as possible. Remember, Apple will provide as long as you give the credit card.
And I think it brings it back to the
main
fact that I
route.
don't think Nintendo would go down this kind of level of complexity. I think they will always keep backwards compatibility in mind, because that's an important part of their business model in terms of just easy adoption. But it all depends on whether or not they'd even support the same, media, the SD card, whatever it is. Is it SD cards they use? What is the little thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Basically a cartridge.
So
essentially
that would be the most likely path that they go down, and they famously had problems with the Super Nintendo because that was the biggest draw that they did, and they screwed that up and cost them a little bit of problems on the CPU back then. But would they go for a very bespoke custom piece of hardware from NVIDIA? And as Matt says, I don't think so. I think that they would go for something that ticks all their boxes, but also gives them ease of compatibility. Now, whether they have a hardware emulation mode to support that, or at least a method to cycle time or mirror the old hardware, that's one thing that they could ask to be put in there. Or however their operating system and environment works, they could emulate it if they have enough hardware oomph in there to emulate something as relatively weak as a Tegra X. It is an X1, isn't it? Tegra X. Yeah. So that's where they would be, and the bit in the middle would be, everyone would think it'd be the Ampere GPU, and more likely it would be something like the Pascal. It might even be Volta, but it all depends on what's cost effective for them at the time, and what deal do they get, because that's what a Nintendo are going to be more interested in.
Yeah, that's why I'm pretty damn sure it wouldn't be Ampere. It would cost them too much. They would go with one generation
but like
older,
the original thing was like, what could they cram DLSS into if they even wanted to do that? And it would only be for TVs, obviously, because on such a small screen at a lower resolution, it
yeah, it's like we could upsample from 240p.
But there's another angle to this, which is like, what's the least they could do? Like, what's the absolute least that they could do? And
Clock Maxwell.
Yeah, with just like base Maxwell, let's just shrink it. And what efficiencies can we get there, right? So if Digital Foundry found that The kind of top clock is for the CPU is almost 1.8 gigahertz, 1785 megahertz. And the power draw goes up to 25%. So it goes from around 15 watts to around 20 watts, right? And I'm assuming that includes the screen and everything else as well. So if that was on the 16 nanometer one, it was on the 20
nm. Oh, well, that was on 16.
It was from last
I think
year.
that was the base switch, wasn't it?
Let's be conservative and assume it was 16 for the sake of argument. So if you cut that in half, let's say, or approximately half, they go to 8 or 10, right? Which is commodity at this point, right? 5nm is being brought up, or so the rumors say, and whatever. So 7 is not the cutting edge, and 8 is not the cutting edge, and 10 is definitely not the cutting edge. Sorry to any people who are fabbing chips at 10, but it's not the cutting edge. So.
You know what to do to his lawn.
But I don't. I just report the news. I don't.
Yeah.
But
Hey, I get shot all the time for reporting the news.
So, but if you're going from 16 to 10, let's say, right? What does that mean in terms of could you just maintain those max clocks the majority of the time that you're in a game instead of boosting it just for loading, but just kind of leave it boosted, for instance, and then get the same battery life?
I would say at that point they would probably increase bandwidth at least a little. I mean, unless
memory
they are
bandwidth,
going to increase the caches or something else.
Sure, that's possible.
Yeah.
It would be easy enough to support, just updating
like
the memory controllers on the chip, the SOC, to be able to support LPDDR4 on them, isn't it? So maybe not 5, but maybe 5. I don't know. It might.
What's the switch? It's 21, right? I think the actual Tegra chip itself is 25, so they could at the very least go to 25 without any changes at all.
Yeah, they should be able to double that though. I think isn't the Switch already 25 gigabytes, isn't it? Yeah. I'm gonna.
I thought it was 21.
Gonna look it up. I don't remember.
Totally
I don't remember.
I know this. I'm looking at the Tegra and it's 25.6, but I have this feeling that the Switch is only 21. But I could be totally wrong.
I actually, I don't know.
It's 25.6 gigabytes per second. 25.6.
Oh, is it?
20.
Okay, I'll take.
Yeah, I thought you. Thanks. 25. So it's got to at least double it, because it wouldn't make any sense to bring out a SOC and limit yourself on something as simple as that. But it might also be better spent to say, do you know what? Let's increase it a little bit, but improve the caches, bump the L1 up to maybe 156K, and bump up the L2 to 4 meg, 8 meg, I don't know, whatever they could fit on there, and just give them a little bit more space and not spend as much time on the actual DDR and the actual bandwidth itself. But is that really what they would do? Again, it's all about what their target focus is. If they're going to be running this in a docked machine that has an upscaled version to 4K, then do they need all that? Is their budget spent elsewhere? And it's all about compromise. Everything's a compromise. It's all about what are they trying to achieve with their target model based on where they are,
right,
and how best can they get it out in the market. And it might be that NVIDIA have an option for them and they actually go bespoke. I don't think they will, but I'm sure NVIDIA would want that, because even though they say it, I still think they feel like they've missed out of the console party. That's where.
Yeah.
Oh, I definitely think they have. I mean, it must be somewhat poking gents in the ribs at night to know that both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox are both using RDNA 2. It must be at least somewhat bugging him that there's that poke that your competitor is being used in both console products. Because I don't know the guy personally, and I'm not belittling him or anything like that. I think he's a really good guy.
If you've ever met a CEO of a company, they all are. There's literally no difference on all of them. They don't get there if they're not that way. But yeah, he's particularly dynamic, I think. Yeah.
That's a good word to use.
Exactly. He seems competitive. Yeah, he seems competitive. And let's face it, it's a huge PR thing as well.
Yeah, but there's the autonomous car market, and not just for consumers, but for whatever. So, like, does it bother him? It's like I think that they have definite strengths that they are playing to, and they're making advances in markets that other people in that space are not making.
Yeah.
Other people in those vertical markets aren't making. So, does it bother him to be winning there but not quite winning here? I don't know. But it's not like they only have success on the PC, or they only have success in like one area. They've got a bunch of verticals that they're serving, where they seem to be having reasonable success. And given their stock performance recently, the market agrees. So
it's going ballistics. I think they overtook Intel as well for the most valuable company out of the three. Out of Intel,
yeah. It's J.C. Penney's going out of business. Like, I'm sorry, you don't know. You guys are from the UK, but like, is Harrods out of business or whatever? It's like there's all these like older businesses that are decades old that aren't able to adapt as quickly or whatever else, and so. And the bigger you are, the harder it is to keep momentum up. But momentum can carry you quite far. The bigger that you are, even if you aren't really creating, accelerating yourself, your momentum will kind of keep you going, even when you're not really doing much. So, it's pretty interesting, I think. But popping back up the stack a little bit, in the digital foundry analysis, they didn't overclock the RAM. They just overclocked the CPU. Let me click here. Go away from. I don't remember what the starting thing was. 12 or 1 gigahertz, just above 1 gigahertz to 1785 megahertz. So that's like a 70%.
That's a massive upclock.
And just goes to show, but there's more power draw. But what they were finding is that the heat was seemingly okay.
How long did they run it for?
I'm sorry?
How long did they run it for?
That's a really great question. I don't know if he ran it until the battery ran out. I'm not seeing in the video here. I'm sorry, I'm not seeing. I'm not.
Yeah, they specifically state they're using Nintendo's clock configuration, docked configuration as comparison. The GPU frequencies can be pushed up 20%.
But in the game testing, they found that the CPU, for most of the games, it was only the CPU overclocked that did anything.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. So they mentioned Doom, they mentioned Dragon Quest Builders, which was I didn't play the second one. The first one was really awesome. I played that one on the Vita. But the temperatures go up to 67 degrees, and the X1 throttles at 83 degrees. So, but in different climates, you need different. So your thresholds are going to be wider than most people really understand for a global audience. But if you had a die shrink, so like the minimum they could do is do it at 10. Keep everything the same. Don't change the default boost clocks. Only use them in whatever. And if their power draw was 15 watts, and it, a die shrink got them down to 10 for completely, or 9, and then you could use the same battery technology and just have less of it and make it lighter. Or you could keep the same amount of battery in it and keep it the same weight, but make the battery last a really, really long time, a much, much longer time. Somehow I don't think that's not what they've kind of done historically. Like with the new 3DS and other stuff, the battery life is sometimes slightly less when they come out with a revision. It never. Yeah.
They basically
so,
shrink
like,
the battery as well.
I mean, that's in terms of something that qualifies as a hardware revision. Does a die shrink qualify as a hardware revision? Just a pure die shrink and nothing else changes? Sure. Because
hardware revisions, yeah. If it's changed, it's changed. Even just specs of the motherboard can be a hardware revision. It's all about
right.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know,
no.
I
but
wouldn't classify it as a pro.
is there a pro? Because I mean, everyone said that the Switch
minimum,
Lite was the pro,
basically.
and it wasn't. It was a Switch Lite. Again, I think bringing it back to what I said right at the start is got to think different with Nintendo. They're just not. Are they ever going to call it a pro? They're probably not. They're probably going to give it another name, like a Switch U.
the
well, they did the 3DS, and what was it, new 3DS or something like.
It did have faster clocks.
Was the new 3DS?
It did, but then there was very few titles that actually used the extra oomph of the hardware.
Yeah.
But there was. I want to.
Was there any exclusives? To
I want to say like a Xenoblade game of some kind.
Yeah.
And maybe one or two other ones, but it wasn't a lot. But you know, some aspects of the system software and other things were a little peppier. I believe it might have had more RAM also. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But you know, when you're coming up with something like that, figuring out what is consistent branding you can have globally that translates into a lot of languages that doesn't confuse people. Because the second someone goes into a brick and mortar store, again pre-pandemic, and goes like, which one do I get? If that is not a razor sharp delineation in that native language for wherever you're shipping it to, people will shrug and go buy something else because people want to get the best value, but they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
You know, they'll just. I am not a market analysis. I don't know what Michael Pachter or other real analysts who really get into the polling numbers and stuff on that is, but I would guess so.
That's what I heard. There was like an analyst or something like that, and consumers were confused. Like people would just, they didn't realize. Like parents thought the Wii.
Yeah, there was an add-on because and I think that's I think it's logical because they also had the balance board. They had all these other peripheral kind of add-ons. So it was in Wii. Wow, it's expensive. I'm not buying that if it's just an add-on versus a balance board or some of the other kind of peripherals. So in terms of like, what would you name such a thing? Like that's a science that you do focus groups on, global focus groups on, everywhere that you're planning to ship the thing to really like nail that down. And I remember for the Wii, when it was called Revolution, and it's the Wii, and people were like, what the hell is this name? And one of the things was, well, it's these letters in this order sound the same in more languages or something like that. I think was part of the explanation there. It was 2006 or whatever, so that's a while ago. So that's really tricky stuff. But the thing that beyond the name is, what's the value proposition if someone's going to pay more? Now, if you're just removing the old thing and putting in the new thing, so it's like, you can't buy the old thing except on eBay. So if you're going into a brick and mortar store of some kind, and your deal with the brick and mortar stores is, hey, we're recalling all of our, all of the shelf space that we have paid this much money to get from you. We're going to take all this product out and put all of this product in. So that's one way to control that situation. But if you're not removing the old one, or the new thing costs more than the old thing, right? People will go and will save their pennies for months to pay $299.99 in pounds or euros or dollars or rupees or whatever. They go in, they go like, oh, I don't see the old thing, and the new thing is $349. I didn't save up that many coins. I'm leaving the store, right? Or I'm buying something else that will meet my needs. But probably if you saved up money for that long, you have your heart set on a specific thing. So so there's a bunch of how do you market it in terms of like what is the price? Do you remove the old thing and kind of stuff like that? But if it costs anything more, like, and I mean anything more, then it's what's the value proposition to get people to buy that thing. And sometimes value proposition is new pack-ins. It's like it comes with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and Animal Crossing or whatever. And obviously going into this holiday, I would assume there's an Animal Crossing bundle if there isn't one already.
Yeah.
Right. So sometimes that's the value prop, is just like, oh, and you get a customized controller that has like Princess Peach's logo on it. Like on eBay, I got a Wii controller for my daughter that is the Princess Peach pink one that has her little crown on it. And it probably cost them like 1/1000th of a penny or something to manufacture those things. Extra money to manufacture those things, but I paid a premium on eBay to get it. So there's well, I'm happy my daughter. I'm happy my daughter is interested in gaming, and
I'm just joking.
representation is what a big part of what does it for her. It's a big part of what does it for her. When she sees a character she relates to, or something like that in a given game, the chances of her sitting down and playing through the frustration of working out the controls or whatever is much, much higher. So value prop is, so you could do like a thing where you have a die shrink and you have the same battery. And then you cut down the battery so it's lighter even. So it's like the new Switch Lite, right? Or something like that. And then you change the pack in and you charge slightly more money. And it's like, hey, you're getting a $30 game for $20 because it's packed in. And it's 5 grams lighter or however much lighter it is, depending on the battery shaved down. That could be it. And that could be enough for them to stay relevant, get like a second wind into their sales for the Switch as a platform, as a brand. It's completely orthogonal way to compete to anything to do with 4K or DLSS. But it's
and I think that's
super
what they'll
safe.
do.
What's that?
I think that's what they'll do. I agree. That's what I think. I think it'll be a Switch XL or a derivative thereof that they'll go for. They'll do exactly what you've just said. They'll replace the Switch. The Lite will stay on the market for a little longer. They'll add a little bit of extra benefits, bigger screen, slightly better performance, more RAM, a couple of packing games, maybe more responsive controllers or slightly redesigned. What are they called? What are the controllers called? Joy-Cons.
Joy-Cons.
Yeah. And then literally sell it for the same $299, and you'll get so many people that will upgrade their current machine, and then you'll get a couple more years out of the same market. And if it's backwards compatible straight out of the box, then great, it's a win-win. Just like the 3DS was, just like the DS was. And I think you're bang on the nail there, Matt. I think that's exactly what they'll probably do. And then everyone will be disappointed on forums because they.
But then everybody will buy it anyways because the Joy-Cons will like be a slightly different shade of green instead. Something we brought up, new 3DS, but what if they had a Switch Micro, where it's not as small as the Game Boy Micro? Or whatever, not like that crazy small where it's so small that the ergonomics are so terrible that you would never play anything on it.
Well, the Game Gear Micro that just came out in Japan.
That's right. Yeah. So, would the screen still need to be 720p? And if it was 720p, then the pixel density would be higher. So, there's other kind of stuff there, but. If you did a die shrink, got rid of a bunch of battery, and was able to save on plastic as well, which is light but doesn't weigh nothing, you could have a Switch Micro that is explicitly targeted, and then basically, it's interesting. Normally devices are hand-me-down where the parents get done with it and they give it to the kids, and then the kids end up playing it. You could come at it from another angle and have a Switch Micro that you get your kids, and then you get your kids full-size Switch. Or whatever, right? Or if you have two siblings or multiple siblings or whatever else, that kind of thing. Usually it's a more powerful device that pushes the less powerful devices down the kind of family food chain in that way, and into the used console and used games market. But what if it came from the other direction? What if it was it's the same power, right? But lighter because there's less battery in it. It is but it has the same battery life and there's less plastic, etc. And then you've got a bunch of
Yeah. You could even have a small.
because
cooling
the
solution as
die
well
shrink
could be
becomes
lighter
less.
because
You
obviously
could
it's
possibly go to
sucking down
passive
the
cooling
juice.
if you don't clock it. If you don't clock it higher at
Exactly.
more of the time, right? But I still do wonder that even if you did that, why
Precisely.
wouldn't you bump up those CPU clocks? Given the thermals that that Richard Ledbetter and the team there at Digital Foundry found that kind of like the actual like temperature wise, the sock doesn't get that much, even at 16 nanometer, 20 nanometer, whichever one they were measuring here, doesn't go up by that much. It seems like you could still bump it up and have, I don't know if completely passive cooling would make any sense because you can still get into climates and geographies like Saudi Arabia or India or other opportunity markets where it is just sweltering the whole year round. So you probably might still want something in there, but you just don't need to run it as often.
Yeah, it could literally be like cool and quiet or something like that, where it.
I
literally
believe
only
it. I
picks
believe
up
that that's the way
when
the cooling already works in
the
this thing. I don't
temperature
think it's
reaches a certain
constant,
threshold.
like it was. But
You might be right. I'm not sure about that, to be honest.
Mhm.
I barely use. Do you know what? To be honest, I
but
barely
like
use
the
lightning
the
bolts
the
anymore.
Vita
That's a weird
didn't
dog.
have any active cooling at all. That was all complete. Nope, that was all completely passive.
Didn't it? A Vita was always one of those consoles I always wanted to get, but I just never.
Yeah, sure.
You know, it's one of those things you keep putting off buying because something else pops up, and then you just never get around buying it.
Yeah,
And you're
yeah.
just like, oh,
The Vita's kind of like the new
basically,
3DS. I got a
the
new
consoles
3DS
are coming out,
XL.
never
I got
mind.
2 of them. One of them I got for $80 from GameStop refurbished. Works fine. No scratches, no nothing. It was like it was like new. But now if you try to go get them, now people are, I don't know, nostalgic for them or something. So now it's actually expensive. And the Vita had that same thing where it kind of got really cheap, but then like the price went up because people started to buy them up because it's still the only portable other than phones that has an OLED screen.
Yeah.
And so low persistence, the colors are, it's not HDR, but the colors are just incredibly vibrant. And some of those games really leaned into that in a way that's really cool. But yeah, and the Vita had, I think, really good battery life. Considering it came out in 2011, so the materials and all that stuff were like from 2010 and stuff like that. The battery life was really great, and the performance was, reasonable. Actually, it was
Pretty good.
depending on the game that you're playing,
What was the battery life on it?
and if you're overclocking it using Homebrew or not. But like I would play a Bit Trip Runner 2, Tearaway, and a couple of other games, some of which were not Kickbeat. It's called something like that, but it was a 60 FPS title. And I wouldn't have to plug it into charge for days. I'd play it for half an hour on the way to work, half an hour on the way back, and so I'd probably get a total of maybe 7 or 8 hours of play out of it. Back in 2012.
The
I don't know
Vita
what
was an excellent machine,
pretty damn
absolutely
good.
super. I still use it regularly. I still have it hooked up. I think it's one of the best pieces of equipment that Sony have put out. It's certainly one of the best handhelds, and it died miserably because of their lack of marketing and pushing of it. I think they gave up on it too quickly, but I missed the Vita. I thought it was a great piece of kit.
The low input latency and the low screen persistence is really awesome for like Bit Trip Runner or for other 60 FPS like portable games. And some of those same games are available on like my iPhone, which has a great screen, great CPU, but they only run at 30. And so even though the screen persistence is better on the iPhone now, the highest end iPhone, there's other things that still make it not quite as good as the game that was tuned for that particular system. But it just kind of goes to show that like you don't need a fan even if you're shipping for a global audience. So if you can get rid of the fan and the fan assembly as well, then it's even thinner and even lighter, right? And also the fan's not pulling any juice from the battery whatsoever, and that's a very, very small amount of power to be pulling at all. But yeah, exactly. It's greater than zero.
Hey, but
So
some juice, some juice.
that's that that could be very compelling depending on how it's marketed and what it's bundled with and a bunch of other stuff. But it would be very interesting if they came at it from a micro perspective and go like, hey, here's, instead of your 5-year-old getting instead of putting out a Switch Pro and your 5-year-old getting your Switch Lite or your old Switch, get your 5-year-old a Switch Micro or Nano or whatever, and then you have a Switch all to yourself that you can put Doom 2016 on or keep docked, right? Or whatever.
Would you nuke the cartridge, or would you keep it all digital?
Do you want me to walk through like the business considerations of that, or?
No, I'm just saying, because I was just thinking, if you keep the I'm just thinking from a perspective of usability. It's like, if you've got a cartridge, it makes it more likely that a kid would want to just plonk in a cartridge rather than the actual downloading of a game, which frustrates, let's face it, if you're like giving it to a 10-year-old. They probably don't want to wait for a big game to download.
From it. And Michael, I think that you said earlier that you have kids.
I do. Yeah.
Okay, so you can chime in with some supplementary angles on this, but there's a lot of parents who don't give their children internet-connected devices at all, right? Because they could go on the web, they could do this, they can click on things without understanding what's going on, and then and like go to an exploited site by mistyping something, and all that kind of stuff, right? So it's a big bad internet out there for smaller kids, and so you have to be really mindful of that. And I think that even for non-handhelds and non-kids, there is a lot of people who buy those consoles and then never connect them to a network. Never, ever. And that's very interesting. But those people, and it's not just people who jailbreak their things and want to stay offline so they don't get their account banned. I think there's a lot of people who do that who have their own reasons. And by a lot, I mean millions and millions of people. So, but as a parent, it's like, do I want this thing online? And there's friend codes and there's that friction, that is there a way to allow people to play local multiplayer games without having to, pass a Mensa level memorization thing of their friend code to be able to tell their friend where that kid has to type it in completely, so I think that there's ways to have social play that is localized, and usually hackers and nefarious people don't want to be within punching distance. And this is something I think that the PSP did really well with their ad hoc networking. I think there's some real incredible innovation there in terms of mobile ad hoc networking, where you didn't need to have a common access point. If you were just all together, it would make a mobile ad hoc network dynamically across the PSPs that you had. I think Nintendo has carried that forward a little bit, and they could continue to do that. So I think that an all digital edition doesn't make sense for that reason. I think also, as much as digital is a potential eventuality and all that other kind of stuff, playing nice with brick and mortar stores and keeping a reason for people to go to brick and mortar stores, modulo pandemic, playing nice with your brick and mortar partners, I think, is a good consideration to have. Now, you can sell physical gift cards still at brick and mortar and that other stuff. You can have, but you need something beyond just the kiosk for the console where people can try it. You need something that people can buy there as well, for that makes sense to your brick and mortar partners. And publishers also have third-party publishers also have a relationship with brick and mortar partners as well. So the midnight sale for some Ubisoft title or what have you, right? Or the GameStop only edition with the special artwork of such and such, right? So there's a whole ecosystem and mesh of relationships there that is important to not going anywhere, I don't think. But the reason I like to have cartridges on my daughter's 3DS, for instance, is if I want her to play one game because it's like an educational game, like the Umizoomi game that she's playing currently or whatever else. I want her to focus on that and finish it. I want her to build up the skill set the game is trying to teach her, so she has kind of one thing to do. And in days of yore, when we were all kids and you would rent a game for a weekend because you couldn't afford to buy games, that was your game. And, you would drink Jolt Cola, stay up all weekend, and that was the game. And was it a good game or a bad game? It was the game, and it was good. It was good to you. You were playing a game,
It didn't
right?
matter whether
And
it's good or bad.
so I think that sometimes restricting choice in that way can help with grit and stick-to-itiveness when games get frustrating, like when the difficulty level rises or that kind of stuff. So that's my perspective as a parent. But the other thing here is those cartridge things. Like my daughter, she's 4, she just turned 5. She's trying to change the cartridges herself. She wants to because she's independent and wants to be very capable and whatever. And like, no matter, I've shown her 5 times, she still tries to put it in upside down and kind of push really hard on it. Now, how hard can she push? She's just a 5-year-old. Hard enough for me to be worried about her breaking the goddamn thing. So, is that enough for me to want to just like download the digital versions of a lot of those titles? First of all, a lot of those titles, especially the educational ones, aren't available on the 3DS. They're all DS games that never had digital versions because the DSi and whatever didn't have digital versions of everything that came out on cartridges. So sometimes I only have cartridges for. Is that durability problem? Is that enough for me to want to go digital and just only have one copy on there and stuff like that? No, because I like there being a physical thing, and that this is just me being old. I like there being a physical thing. I like there being a physical thing for her, where it's like, hey, you completed your workbook. Let's take out Arkanoid DS and let's put in Dora the Explorer or whatever else. I like that being an explicit, tangible thing for her in terms of reward for doing non-video game stuff. So that's so I think there's a business side of it that comes down to brick and mortar partners, which are a very necessary part of this ecosystem. Period. Full stop. And I think, let's say Switch was going to have a 72 hertz display or do something amazing or whatever. You need kiosks in brick and mortar, right? You can do and that's how people are going to see it. Because there's some stuff you can't be told. You can't be shown in a YouTube video yet. You can't. You have to see it or interact with it to get it.
It's like it's the irony of HDR, and everyone does their best to try and show HDR on like an SDR video, and it's just like, and you'll see them try to do things like on one of the displays, like make the colors look really crap, just to kind of do everything they can, and it's just like, you really just
now.
Tell them to go to the store. Just please
go.
Right
and there's a YouTube channel I really like called HD TV Test, and they're out of the UK also, and they use a special camera that can capture more of the tones, that can, and all this other stuff to try to show the difference side by side between two HDR TVs. But then they get rat fucked by the video compression, and that's not a dig against YouTube. It's just, or VP9 or whatever codec. It's just it's doing what it's supposed to do. Right. And it's challenging. It's challenging as these things get higher fidelity. But even for something like a 72 hertz screen or new controllers that are more ergonomic and don't have crazily sharp plastic edges that are really uncomfortable to hold, all that is stuff that people will probably want to, especially if they're going to buy an upgrade of something they just bought 2 or 3 years ago. They're going to want to be convinced, probably, unless they have a lot of excess cash, which is case, it's a easier sell. So I think that there's a business reason for that, but I think just coming at it from a parent perspective, physical cartridges serve a lot of different purposes, and how to responsibly integrate video games, handheld gaming into your child's life. Michael, was there any stuff that speaks to you, or any other additive stuff from a parent's perspective?
I think my kids are a bad example because one just
They're
lives
Amish.
lives on digital. He literally will. He can't be bothered swapping discs, so it would be a
Okay.
hassle for him to just think, well, it's on the game. I'll click it, and I'll download it. That said, downloading updates is obviously the bane of the modern gaming world we live in. Every time you turn something on, it's an update and it's 4 gig or whatever, and so that has turned him off and it's got worse. I think in the last couple of years, it's got more prevalent in terms of games happening. So I think it would definitely be something it would need to keep. I can't see Nintendo dropping a cartridge from the box because it doesn't have that much cost. It has all that additional benefit, like you said, the residual benefit of working with the bricks and mortar stores, the supply chain, and having that ability that you can reach a wider market. And there's lots and lots of the world that Nintendo selling that don't have very good internet connection. We're quite privileged, in our area, and my internet's not even that good. But there's some places that will never have that at all for the next 5 years. So I think that's too much to cut off from your market, and I think that's where Nintendo are very savvy in terms of what the market needs, how they'd sell it, and it would work. And I think most kids would like to have a pack of games on their shelves. We all did, and that's one of the things that got us into games. I think is actually the physical ownership of it. And I would hate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh God, no! Prior to my dead cold hands before I do, but.
Says the PC gamer, I just realised. But yeah, generally speaking, I'm just like, wow, I sound like such a complete bastard right now. But
you could always go dumpster diving at a studio and get their Goldmaster press discs, and that could be the way you load some of Steam things onto your PC. It's possible.
Bethesda, you know what to do. I mean, technically, there are some things that are still sold here, and they'll be like, 25 DVDs or something like that. You're just like, what are you doing? I think it was Mass Effect Andromeda or something like that. I bought on like physical, and I didn't even bother. I don't even have like a DVD drive anymore on my system. Yeah, like I'm just like, forget that. And so I just typed the key into the Steam, and I'm still downloading it, even though I own like the game like physically. Just like, no, you're just going to install it on Steam anyway. I know what you're going to do. I don't think it was Mass Effect, but it was one of the modern times.
Fallout 76.
Yeah, because it was cheaper. Ironically, buying it for physical release.
That was one where the physical version went on crazy sale really quickly.
No.
I recall.
Yeah, but I didn't myself physical.
When we got our PlayStation 3 in 2007 or whatever it was, and PSN was brand new, I loved the idea of bite-sized games from the OG Xbox and the games that we had there. I felt like games had a lot of padding in them, and that's not a knock against Xbox, but just in general on the PC as well. Games had a lot of kind of padding around them, and I just wanted simpler games, and I loved a lot of those early PSN games because it's like, this is $5, it's 4 hours long or whatever, or in some cases like the name will come to me later. There's an amazing title that looks great and has the most amazing surround sound of any PS3 game, but it was a PSN title, Blast Factor.
Yeah.
Never beat it. We would always get to like level 12 or something like that, and then like it was arcade. It was old school. There were no saves. So it was like, okay, let's get our catheters and colostomy bags ready because we're going to stay here and we're going to beat this game. And never did beat it, but we had a 7.1 surround set up with a good subwoofer. And that game, the sound designer in that game just really used everything about that system to the fullest extent. But so I got into digital really, really early on PS3. And unless there was a special edition of a game or something like that, I would typically not buy it at retail. But what's interesting is, and I'm a whale, and not humble brag. I'm gonna sound like an asshole, but so like between PS3, PS4, and Vita, I have thousands of titles because I play a lot. I don't play everything, but I play a very broad swath of stuff to understand what's going on and try to just sample as much of the medium as I can. as an enthusiast, and I'm very privileged to be able to do that. And like I said, I sound like an asshole, but so I'm really into digital. But what's kind of not precisely,
Well, to
but
be fair,
but
it is
I'm
your
a kind of
job
hyper
kind as
enthusiast.
Yeah,
do.
well,
Yeah, it's like
you
what's
like
what.
Roblox now, right? So it kind
Yeah,
of is.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Don't
but
hold that against
I
the
did
guy,
get
but
back into
still.
physical recently because of places like limited run games, and I am 8-bit, and trying to think the other place I order T-shirts and stuff from. But like, it's another way to support the creators. It's another way. So for like this game I loved recently, Yoku's Island Express, like laptop sticker, like, you know, stickers and T-shirts and physical games. Once I got that game and I loved it, I'm like, I want this developer to do more stuff like Yoku's Island Express. Same thing for Way Forward with Shantae and like that stuff like that. Like I view it as another way that if I have the means, it's a way to not just make a donation via like a Patreon or something like that, but to also like show my support and kind of try to like show give them support in between games, right? And so I ended up getting quite a collection of PS4 titles and Vita titles as well. In fact, the shirt I'm wearing right now, let me move my microphone for a second so you can see it. This one right here is I think it's a Kickstarter reward for Knights and Bikes, which was a couple of developers from Media Molecule. After they made Tearaway, went to form their own independent studio. They did Kickstarter, which I backed. And Knights and Bikes is a delightful adventure game, just incredibly charming. They also have a little like novelization books as well as stuff like this. So they've got for a small studio, they've got an amazing transmedia play that they're doing, and I think that so that's an example of something where it's like I ended up getting kind of back into physical because for some of these titles like Knights and Bikes or Yoku's Island Express, they're great, fantastic games with a lot of handcrafted love and charm, but the discoverability and how popular can they be with how crowded those digital storefronts are and all that kind of stuff. And so I view physical, both disc games as well as getting the stuff like the T-shirts and whatnot as a way just to like show even further support for that developer.
T-shirt's cool. We've got a chopper on there, very old school. I had a chopper when I was a child, so that's a 70s shirt. That's a chopper on the front. Love it.
Oh yeah. It's a delightful game. It's, I believe, out on Switch and PS4, and I'm not sure if it's on Xbox One. Yoku's Island Express is on PS4 and Xbox One and Switch as well. But yes, I kind of got back into physical personally, and I am a collector, and my husband will tell you I collect too many things. I have probably 1,100 Blu-rays and DVDs. I'm a big film fan, I know. I'm a big film fan. When I would have insomnia, I would listen to DVD and Blu-ray commentaries as a way to kind of wind down and try to get myself to sleep and that kind of stuff. And so, yes, I have a penchant for this already. And limited run games, and there's a couple of other manufacturer publishers like that I don't have the names offhand on the tip of my tongue right now. When there's some game or some indie developer that I like that's doing great work and I want to see their next thing, I want them to keep honing that craft and getting better and better. I will circle back and go like, okay, what physical stuff, what swag do they have? Even if it's stuff like T-shirts and stuff like that. So that's the main reason I have, for modern stuff, I have physical stuff. But for things like my Mega SG and my Super NT, which are these FPGA-based consoles that recreate the Mega Drive and the Super Nintendo, I did start collecting. Again, I have a problem. I have a serious problem. I did start I do have a small collection of Sega Genesis cartridges, Super Nintendo cartridges, and stuff like that as well. But when we're playing PS3 or PS4, I don't whip discs out unless there's not a digital version of it. So we just started playing Beatles Rock Band with my daughter on the drums. That was never released on a digital storefront. So that's one where I have to put the disc in.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I'm very. Everything I've got is physical, so I've still got stuff from like you saying about the FPGA consoles. I don't buy them. I don't have any interest for them because I have the original stuff. So I've still got my old Commodore
Okay.
8, there's Commodore 64. I've got the Acorn. I've got about 17 Mega Drives.
So you must have recapped all of those things at this point.
You know what? Recapping, it has been a big part of my life over the past few years because I've
bet it's about
died. So I did an Amiga and an Atari ST video a couple of years ago, and I took them out of the cupboard.
Yeah,
attic. I took it out.
Video.
Yeah, it was kind of it was an inspiration to go back, and it kind of got me more into all the stuff I used to. And I pulled them out, and they look really good condition, but Atari ST wouldn't turn on, and the Amiga had flickering images, and it was all down
caps.
To the delete. Yeah, so I had to pop them all off and sold them new caps on, and they're relatively easy to do and they're relatively easy to find. But I actually found it very therapeutic. And then since then I've repaired so many things. I bought a PC Engine, Super Duo, did that online, repaired it. Nice. I've got a video that I'm going to do. I need to finish it off. I found walking my dog. I found an old Sony behind me, Sony Trinitron TV that had been dumped in a field.
Oh, good find!
No,
wow.
It was, yeah. It was dumped in a field. It had dog crap on it. And I thought, I don't care. I'm taking it. So I took it, and it wouldn't turn on, but there was definitely power to it because I could hear the buzz inside. So I repaired that, cleaned it all out, and I videoed it. I had to shower it, take all the case off, shower it.
Man.
I'll put that video.
To that.
Yeah, I will put it up. I've been editing it together, but yeah, it was I finally got it working again. It was such a euphoric moment of like, yes, I've brought it back from the brink. So I love doing all that stuff, and I think that I miss that physical connection with hardware and collecting stuff. And I must admit, yes.
That's why I'm not a fan of cloud. I can't get into cloud for the same reason. It just scares me. I know that sounds silly because like I'm so into tech, but it just kind of there's like this part of me that just it feels so far away. Like everything, it just feels like you don't own it. There's no physical connection to it. Well, it just feels like I want my computing to be locally, and I know logically it doesn't make sense.
Well, you can use GOG, right? So GOG is DRM free, but in downloading stuff, but you don't have to like phone home every so often. Like GOG, you downloaded it and you had it, as well as Epic and other. Yeah, I love GOG. Love GOG.
Exactly.
But
there's a great service, by the way.
And maybe this is a different conversation for a different time, but and we could do another one of these chats. But for me, with streaming, it's a change, and what's in it for me? It's like, well, you can play on your phone, not over LTE. No, and not on my commute. So what's in it for me as a consumer? Why should I make this change? Why should I transfer this ownership? Why should I be charged a monthly fee to keep playing a game? And the answer potentially technologically is, for one thing, so for latency-based games like Doom over streaming or whatever, I don't know why that's a flagship thing to show, something that's so twitchy and whatever else. The game
I actually tried that at GDC.
Yeah.
And they were trying to tell me how good it was, and I tried it, and I was like, oh god, this is bad. I first trying it on controller, and then I switched to mouse and keyboard. And I'm not saying, like, I'm the best Doom player ever, but I can certainly get past, like,
I think it's also what you're used to
on medium,
right? And so modern TVs have shit tons of latency, right? Potentially, and some of them before they had game mode, right? And so now you could put it into game mode if you even know what game mode is to get it down to 18 milliseconds. Or my Sony OLED TV, I think, is it's like 18 milliseconds when it's in game mode, which is a frame behind and it's perfectly reasonable. But if you grew up playing Donkey Kong or Robotron with no latency, effectively, you would probably not be able to do stuff. And Bob from Retro RGB, which is another channel I really like, and I support him on Patreon, talks about how they've done studies where they kind of increase the latency 1 millisecond at a time and then hand it over to people who are world champions at Tetris or Street Fighter. And it's like, I forget if it's like 9 milliseconds or something like that, or 8 milliseconds or 6 milliseconds is where they stop being able to do what they do. Like, which is like crazy, amazing stuff. So if no, but I'd also say display latency is
different.
It's different than input latency. Like it's that whole chain that actually what matters. You can have a 240 hertz thing, but a crappy USB hub that is doing.
No, that.
Oh yeah. You need to
the
attack that whole chain there. But so I think that
reducing input latency and all of this stuff.
There are gaming experiences that simply do not map to streaming, and one should not try to map them to streaming. So then it's like, well, what can you get if you're all in the cloud, right? But all those servers are either not physically co-located in the same building necessarily, but have a kind of a backhoe fiber connection or whatever it is that is incredibly low latency. And if you had thousands of players with the kind of interconnect between them being extremely low latency, what could you do in a massively multiplayer game with state synchronization or other things that you simply would not be able to do if those same 1,000 or 10,000 people were doing it via the big wide internet, where you have different latencies and they're not always consistent. And if your cable provider or your internet provider is oversubscribed, they might have weird QoS rules that by themselves add latency to the whole chain, but also means that if too many people are doing internet at the same time, your latency and bandwidth goes haywire because it's not consistent. So I think that there's a potential for Stadia or NVIDIA to create new content, brand new games that go like, okay, here are the constraints. There are new constraints, but here are the constraints that are relieved. What I'm excited for is for people like Q Games, who was on stage for the Stadia event. They didn't have a game to announce then, but they said they're working on it. I am psyched to see what creators do when you go like, here's these new constraints, but these other constraints are completely open. And they have nothing to do with graphics. It has nothing to do with the 10 teraflops or whatever it is that's in the Stadia base profile. Yeah. For me, it's not so much you have more GPU. What can you do?
Vega based.
The
Vega 10.7, I think.
Interconnect latency between the players becomes near zero or as good as zero. Now what can you do? And not just Q Games, but the other creators as well. When it's like they're going to create a specific thing for that specific thing. I talked about Pixel Junk Eden, 1080p, 60 FPS. Full range RGB over HDMI, right? It's like, but it's digital, so it has to be smaller, right? And I'm excited for not just Q Games, but other creators to take that new set of constraints and freedoms and do something we couldn't imagine or anticipate, because that's their job, right? Our as smart as we may or may not be, I'm not a game creator, right? I'm not a rendering engine creator. I'm not a game mechanic creator or whatever. I read a lot about it. I have lots of books. I play lots of games, but I don't have the experience of releasing something, iterating on it, seeing stuff fall on its face, seeing stuff succeed, etc., like all these other creators do. So I am sure something really fucking cool will come from those creators with those constraints and those with those new constraints and those new freedoms. I'm positive we will see stuff where we'll go, oh shit, well that's how you do it. And it's something that we weren't thinking about because we were thinking like Doom, it sucks to play Doom. But not thinking about like, oh, well if it's real-time turn-based, but with thousands of players and low latency, what does that mean? What does the gameplay, what does the fun loop look like for that when there's no latency? And I have no proprietary knowledge or anything. I'm just, but I think if you start to think along those lines and just mentally throw spaghetti against the wall to go like, well, yeah, what could you do? I think even if you're just a reasonable enthusiast that plays a lot of genres, you yourself can start to come up with like, oh yeah, you know what's a problem is in mass action game with 200 people on the screen, or in Fortnite with this many people on the, there's these problems, and it's got to be a problem with regulating the latency across all the people and stuff like that. All that state synchronization stuff. So I haven't seen anything yet
as well,
that makes me go, that's the innovation. That's the game I want to play. That's the thing that will make me sign up. But I know that they, Jade Raidman, I believe, is there at Stadia, and Shannon Studstill just left Santa Monica Studio after many, many years to go to, I believe, to Stadia as well, if I recall correctly. So I think that they've got the leadership in place, and the right third-party creators in place to come up with some amazing stuff. Does it actually happen? Right? Because there's a lot of stuff in between there. Company culture, can they execute? Can they stay the course? Can they follow through?
Yeah.
Blah, blah, blah. Those are legitimate questions, but that to me is just kind of throwing shade and being pessimistic for no reason.
Well, that's a common trend though, isn't it? But you mentioned Q Games, and I think Q Games is one of the most innovative teams that make games at the moment, and they've already got a taste of that, didn't they? Because remember, anyone play the Tomorrow Children?
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Love that game.
You can't play it anymore.
You can't, yeah. No,
because it was online. It was online only, and when they took the servers
it
down, there was no single player. And
Really?
I bring up the Tomorrow Children a lot when I'm on technical podcasts.
I
Because
did a big analysis on that when it came out. I think it was so forward thinking. I mean, it was visually it was stupendous, but it was more than that. It was what it was trying to do.
PS4, it was a PS4 exclusive.
Yeah.
Well, because we're talking about PS4, you'll have to cut this part out.
What
But
platform was this?
But it used like Ray March reflections, global illumination, 3/4 bounces. It
voxel cone tracing.
Voxel cone tracing. So it used such great technology when people weren't really kind of pushing that area. I mean, this was almost a launch game. It was very early in the generation of the PS4.
It was pretty early, yeah. And PS4 Pro wasn't even out yet.
Yeah,
exactly. So they did. They called it 2.5 bounce, but let's just say triple bounce because most of the bounces ended up being triple bounced Ray March lighting on base PS4, and that's a great example. It's a really good example. That's why I have such confidence in them, is because with the SPUs, and here's SPUs, which is a very distributed thing, which wasn't common at the time, but you've got full range HDMI, you've got all this other stuff. Go. And they did it. And then Pixel Junk Shooter with its fluid simulations and other stuff that you just never seen before at that resolution. And it was 2D, but the amount of simulation and stuff they had to do that was a core to the mechanic. And then they did it again with the Tomorrow Children in 3D, where it's like, okay, you've got async GPU compute, your command queues are you got as many command queues as you want. It's not just one command queue. So you can send GPU commands from all the threads you want, and there's no go. And
they did a big talk on that. In fact, how much they filled the bubble in terms of optimization for the
absolutely.
And that's why I've always been a fan of them. But then the main guy from the Q Games, the
Dylan
Cuthbert, he's been a star since I was a child. Because obviously Star Fox was him.
Yeah.
Argonaut, a UK company, they helped make the Super FX chip. So
that's right.
Yeah, he's an absolute mathematician, and I do follow him online, and I've chatted to him before, but they really have the passion behind the old school games. And I think with Stadia, they've got the opportunity to do something new. I hope they take and try almost recreate the Tomorrow Children, because I know that it affects him in terms of he misses that game himself personally. I think the team do. And I think they had a lot of hope and aspirations for that game. And I don't think it got the lifespan it deserved. It was a little bit strange in quotes, but you need things that are different. If everyone follows the trend, it just gets boring.
100%. You need people throwing spaghetti against the wall.
Yes.
And the Tomorrow Children, another one that comes to mind is The Witness, right?
Yeah.
Another completely custom renderer, scales up, scales down, scale down to mobile. But you need people trying different stuff. You need homogeneous people doing things with the hardware that in a heterogeneous way. so that everybody can learn from each other. Because if everybody just uses Unity or uses Unreal, which are both fine engines, and I have make no judgments there, you lose that. And so you need those demo scene coder type people that have a hardware background and a mathematical background, like a Dylan Cuthbert and his other people in his team who are also amazingly talented. Also, and fun fact, I was the booth babe at GDC Independent Games Forum. Pixel Junk 4am was nominated for a Best in Music award, and they put out a tweet saying, any Pixel Junk 4am fans want to help us? I'm like, I live in San Francisco. I love Pixel Junk 4am. And Pixel Junk 4am was this game thing where it used 2 move controllers, and you could virtually play beats, and it used the vibration when you were reaching to pick up a spinning record, an invisible spinning record, and put it down, and you could dial in LFO and stuff in 3D, and then stream it. And what they did is PS3 had a cloud save concept, and there was one where it's like your private cloud saves, and then there was a public cloud save. And what they did in that game was a correct use of the APIs, but it really messed up the infrastructure team, because what they were doing is they were constantly rewriting the stream as a save in that public slot that all your friends could see, and it wasn't made to be written to at that rate, and it wasn't real time or anything like that, but it was like but it was faster than they were expecting, and they had to dramatically change their thing because it was sort of a move launch title. But that's another example of them innovating, and that was a network innovation to me. I mean, the move stuff was really cool, and the music stuff was really cool, but it was a move. It was not just a move; it was a network innovation as part of that play, create, share thing. So Dylan and Dylan's team, right? There's a bunch of talented people there, most of which are now on the ICE team at Sony, and have been on the ICE team. Since after Tomorrow Children.
Really?
I don't want to talk about it. I can't talk about it. But the game ended. You can guess how it went. There was some turnover there at the studio, and a lot of those really talented, low-level, crazy-ass coding people, a lot of them joined the ICE team, which is all on LinkedIn, and they've all talked about it publicly on Twitter, so there's no proprietary information there. So, but there is a lineage there that makes me excited. And it's one of those things. Streaming, Stadia sucks. They botched their launch or whatever else. Like, there's still, for me, it's not hard to find stuff to be excited about. But we can talk about that in a different stream, or you could snip this out and put it in a different whatever. Yeah, let's.
Yeah.
Sure.
I was going to say it's like 2 and
that's true.
Something
that's
hours
true.
now, 2.5.
To get to.
So I think it's probably a good time to wrap up because I need to go to bed soon. Yeah, it's like, oh, okay. But you know what? This has been a ton of fun, even though it's been kind of a bitsy video. I have to say, from my perspective, it's been really nice to be the one that's asking the dumb questions for once, rather than like actually sitting back and getting the answers. It's been
as opposed to the monkey,
so this is
as opposed to the
like
monkey that has to tap dance.
I like it. Yeah.
No, I think it was a good chat. I enjoyed it. It was good listening to Matt's views and opinions and expertise on things. So I did appreciate the time, Matt. Thanks very much.
Oh no, thank you. I'm a big fan of your channel, and based on your really fantastic analysis of everything, including the Atari ST and Amiga one, but also just like I knew that you had done so much research into the nitty gritty of like, well, here's what CUs gets you, here's what clocks gets you, here's what whatever gets you, and that you have a really good seasoned perspective, given that you go back to like C64 demo scene and that kind of stuff. So it was a real thrill for me to be able to chat with two people whose like YouTube and other content that I've been following for I want to say years. I want to say it's been at least 2 or 3 years for the both of you. So it's a real thrill and privilege for me.
Wow. You know, it's kind of strange to me because recently, I can't say the company, we have mention them in the video, but I can't say because it's confidential emails that get transferred backwards and forwards. And the person wrote to me and was like, it's kind of funny that you email me because I'm a fan of your channel. And I'm like, yeah, it's so strange to to be actually watched by
and also
people
I think
in the
it
industry.
helps highlight the responsibility
it actually kind of makes me feel very
to have integrity
humbled.
and be upright and own mistakes and
Exactly.
it's okay to have an opinion, but trying to harness negativity from an audience or whatever, and I think that's to me that's refreshing, right? Where it's like here are the facts and I have an opinion about it, but that doesn't mean that this company or this product was built by dummies or whatever. It's just different people take different approaches or different chances or different risks, and sometimes they play out and sometimes they don't. And we should all be thankful that people take chances and risks that sometimes don't play out. That's how we get innovation.
Exactly.
Nope.
Precisely because,
Nope.
I mean, sticking off the Sony and Microsoft thing, because I don't think any of us want to touch that for a barge pole. But if we look at the old history of, let's say, Sega and Nintendo, and how their fierce competitiveness, if Sega had not constantly poked at Nintendo for the 16-bit era, just imagine if Nintendo had not faced that competition, had not had to undergo that. How do we know that the market would have been anywhere near as profound? Like, Sega came along, they donkey punched Nintendo. The Nintendo responded with the Super Nintendo, and then it continued, and then Sony came along and kicked both of them in the shin with the PlayStation. And then it continues, and that's what I want. That's innovation and forcing the other company to do better.
And Sega
That
also
to
showed
me
them
is
like, hey, you don't have to
the way
custom build
forward
every
for
single
this
chip
industry,
and like
we all
whatever
win as
else.
customers.
You can
We all
use
win.
you can cut down an Amiga, add an extra video processor, and be good to go. Or a cut down arcade machine is really what it was, right? Absolutely.
Or even Dreamcast was an amazing piece
Oh,
of architecture, to be honest.
Oh yeah. The Dreamcast was
SH4,
the most forward-thinking
SH4
machine,
power-
definitely the most forward-thinking
power
console. Because
VR
you figure what
Highlander, I
we've
think
got
it was.
now, you've got effectively a cut-down PC that ran Windows. Was literally it was crazy.
To see.
It had a built-in modem. It supported broadband in certain countries. It was expandable. It literally everything you take for granted now, they did way back in 1998. Yeah.
Yep.
Even VGA, so you could even output progressive scan 480p.
Sonic Adventure
Soul
as well.
Calibur
Nights into Dreams.
beautiful.
You go on and on.
So
Soul
many-
Calibur on, like, a
Topic for another
decent
podcast.
monitor.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, that game. Next time I've told both of you guys who I want the guest to be on the next one. So I'm quite excited. I'm gonna stalk him in a please don't call the police on
Just
me.
to find out what kind of chocolates that they like, and then send them those chocolates.
responsibly.
And then
if
it's like,
so,
hey,
I
they
think it'll be a
figured out my
really good
personal address
conversation.
somehow, but hey, chocolate.
Yeah, I
Fair
think
enough.
I think
You
at
also
that
don't-
point
don't-
he'd have other problems other than I think he'd kind of stop.
It's like,
at the
where's my
personal address
chocolate?
thing.
Yeah, exactly. You have to buy 2 chocolates.
And my
and-
girlfriend would probably be.
And then you have to buy chocolates for
asking
everybody,
why I'm sending
and then you're
some random
bankrupt,
guys
and then
some
you're living in
chocolates.
a van man by the river. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Because, like, how many people are there in the world? Now let's tap the amount of chocolate I need. All right, guys. I'm gonna go.
Is there
before I
any
pass
sign
out.
off that you want us to
There's,
do, or
like,
I did,
any
yeah,
more
yeah. Well, I don't
any
to zone out.
closing call letters?
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah. So, Michael,
Yeah, no,
did you want
that's
to,
fine. Yeah, so
let
just
people know
over
how
on
they can
YouTube,
find
NX
you?
Gamer.
I'll
It's
put a
not the
link, of
best name in
course,
the world. I
all
made it
of the
ad
stuff
hoc at
anyway
the
in the
time, but yeah,
description,
check it
but-
out. I do video analysis, technical analysis, games, hardware, software. Actually, just to touch on what Matt was talking about earlier, latency. I did a PS Now analysis last year, so that's quite interesting if you want to understand about latency, net testing. I'll do all that in my games as well. Network latency, time to server, ping rates, all that kind of good stuff. So check it out. Hopefully, it's educational and enjoyable.
I am SYKE on Twitter, and I have a YouTube channel that doesn't have any useful videos on it. It's usually me recording bugs in games and complaining. Although I did stream in.
It's useful, yeah.
Although I did get the platinum in Infinifactory a few months ago, and I streamed a lot of me playing Infinifactory, and there's a. It starts off very positive, and then the game gets to be quite a slog at the end in terms of the difficulty and the bothersome controls by the end. But I think that's Plastic Psych, PLAZTIKSYKE. That YouTube channel. Again, there's almost nothing worthwhile on it.
You better go and subscribe and ring the bell right now.
Right, exactly. I'm gonna get tons of notifications all of a sudden.
Yeah,
but yeah, people can reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open if they want to ask non-proprietary questions, or they can continue the kind of conversation there. And on this video, I'll take a look at the comments, and if people want to engage there, I'll keep an eye on it for a couple of days after it goes up to try to answer any follow-up stuff.
Yeah. All right. I'll let you guys both know when it's going to be up. It's probably going to be a day or two, because obviously I've got to edit, and at the moment I'm working on the Xbox Hot Chips thing, which is almost done. But we're not going to talk about that because I don't want to get Matt in trouble, because some of the stuff is proprietary and blah 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 blah. But yeah. Anyway,
Paul, thanks for inviting me. Cheers, Matt. Take care, guys.
Because I'm very tired. But thank you very much, guys. Take care. Bye for now. Right, I've stopped the recording now, so thanks very much, guys, off the recording. It's been